Okay, that's live now.
Running the captioner, it says I'm being too quiet when I'm not saying anything, and I'm like, yes, I imagine that would in fact.
It
be
says
too
I'm being
quiet.
too quiet no matter what, so I have no idea.
Whatever. It's just a picky little bitch.
Yes, it is.
Indeed.
Good, it didn't censor that. There's an option on here for censoring bad language. I'm just like, I wouldn't be able to communicate at all. Oh, mercy.
I feel like that one SpongeBob episode where Mr. Krabs just curses for like a whole minute straight, and they just keep doing like dolphin sounds over it.
Oh yeah.
You know,
that's a fun episode.
Years and years and years ago, I was watching Charles Fleischer speak at an event. He was the guy who voiced Roger Rabbit, and he there was a sign language interpreter providing sign language to the audience, and he glanced at her for a minute and then started saying really weird things to try and mess with her, like just try and force her to try and sign all this. He was like, the man standing behind me, his name is Zev, which is spelled backwards is Vez, which is the Hindustani word for wet matzah, and like he was just improvising this stuff, and the sign language was like scrug. It was bad.
Have you tweeted?
Yes, it has been tweeted.
I'm going to retweet and link this a few different places.
Oh, you're going to retweet? Well, then I'm going to retweet too.
Oh yeah, well I'll retweet double.
Oh yeah,
I'll retweet your retweet.
I can't retweet. I can't retweet you, Stoker, until you come over here and retweet me.
Oh yeah, well
no problem.
I can't retweet you if you're over there. That's what I was hoping for you to say.
I would also retweet it if I had more than one follower, and also if I was added in the tweet.
Oh well, no tweet for you.
Denied.
Megatron. We looked at some of the SCPs. I'll take a look at this one and see. But the problem with SCPs is that they're really good to read, like silently to yourself, but they don't make for a lot of they don't make for particularly good audio reading.
Right.
I'll look over this one. I may do this one because I'm looking. What is it, Jonas?
How do you say the redacted parts? Like,
well, that's the thing. I'm looking over this one. It doesn't look like most of this one appears to be not redacted. I suppose one of the options you could have is to just literally say redacted when you hit a part that's redacted. But
they're not designed as like, they're not dramatic narratives. You know, I mean,
that's part of the appeal because they're so dry. You know, right. That's what it's like a found footage movie in text form.
Okay, I found my
Blair Witch Project.
There's a YouTube channel I saw that does like dramatic readings of some of the SCP pages.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. The only one that I found interesting was the one that I liked, my favorite SCP, which is the one that you can't write about it or else they'll kidnap you.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did this very sort of dramatic, sort of like, imagine a fairy tale where you have this person, his name is Billy. He lives in a castle, all in his room. And if anybody that talks about Billy, Billy comes to them. And he just like went off on this like original story that kind of related to the thing in metaphor. It was a fun read, but I've seen some of the other ones and they're not as good. Yeah, I don't think it's a auditory medium.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. But I may give it a shot. We'll see.
Well, yeah, we'll see.
I do have one pasta and a couple of classic creepy stories picked out. And I am open to suggestions. I think we're all open to suggestions, unless I'm wrong, in which case we're not. But I personally am.
We're all susceptible to suggestion.
Yeah, you are not immune from propaganda.
I've got one that I've liked to read, and then I have a physical copy of Pale Horse, Pale Rider, but that's like a 50-minute read.
Yeah, that may be a bit much.
So, I'm good for some suggestions.
Very well.
I was trying to think, like, do I have any favorite creepypastas? And I really don't. Like, I don't stumble across those very often.
I used to read them more often than I do. More often than I do now, I should say. Did your suggestion make the list? What was your suggestion again, Diego? I think you linked it to me. Let me see. Oh, right. I need to Google this because I actually forgot to look it up. Oh no! How could I do such a thing? I didn't mean to hit random story. Ooh, but I got a very highly ranked random story, so I'll consider it.
There should be a creepypasta that's just like, it's just a musical. Like, you never know when it's coming, and then suddenly you're trying, you can't stop singing, you know.
Stream just close?
Did it?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, I wasn't going to leave that up while other people were going to do it, unless everybody wants to stream all of their screens at the same time.
Oh, no. Oh!
Okay, so who is...
My brain was like, but Rick isn't streaming the game. How they get easy what we're doing?
So who's going first?
Let's see. I'm game.
Your game Cobra.
Yes, I am.
It never gets old. Oh.
It never gets old. Let me see here.
I could also open us. It depends on who wants to open.
Okay, rock, paper, scissors? Nah.
Well, if it's just the two of us, we could always flip a corpse.
Ah.
Don't corpses usually land butter side down?
It's like the cat. You butter the corpse on one side, and then you strap a cat to it, and you create an anti-gravity machine. Oh, there's only going to be so many people who get that. All right.
Alright, I flipped a coin. Game Cobra.
Heads.
Tails.
That GC wins.
Very well. If
And
that is what you wish, then GC, you have the floor. And are you going to stream the screeny thing?
Sure.
Oh, shoot, hang on, sorry. Just a second.
So
Go.
what do I? So basically, what I do is I.
You just open it up into a browser window, and then stream that browser window to Discord.
And Rick can handle it from there.
Oh,
I see.
okay. Try it. Let me see if I get this done right.
I feel like we may have read this one before on the stream, Diego, but I'm still game.
Okay. Did I do it right?
Let's have a look.
Oh.
Nope.
Ooh, no. How's that?
That is not the one with the caption on it.
That is the Twitch.
Oh, okay. 1 second.
Yeah, there's an option to only stream one specific window. In fact, what I'd recommend is having this in a browser, in like a browser where it's the only tab.
Sorry about that. Okay.
I am working on doing the same.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I can't hear a word.
I just want to make sure that it didn't like steal my microphone input.
Oh,
captioning.
okay. Okay. I see how this works. Let's see here. Start captioning. Okay. That's how it works. I just. Okay, just put my mic in closer. It's a little too quiet though for some reason. Viking poster.
Stoker's streaming his now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just testing it. I can
Okay.
stop streaming it.
Okay, refresh.
Whee! Don't go outside day. Wait, that's been this whole year.
So actually, I have one question. If I put the web caption up, how do I read off my creepypasta while that's up?
It will, if you set it to just capture that window, you don't actually have to have that window open all the time. It'll still be kidding you, and it'll still be putting that up for us,
Gotcha.
but you can look at another window.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, let's give it a shot.
This technology baffles me, and therefore I fear it.
I just never do this, but oh, here we go. Web captioner. Google Chrome. Okay.
Okay, I'm seeing your web captioner now. Now I'm seeing
I see
something
Borat.
else.
Now do you see the... Yeah, okay.
Now take the web captioner and make it its own window.
Okay.
Yeah, just drag it out.
Okay.
I hate this Twitch app. Ah,
Okay, how's that?
Well, I can't see that
We
window
still
now.
see
You have to
Borat.
switch it over to that window.
Okay, yes, okay. I got you. So let's stop the stream. Okay. Screen share. Okay, web caption. Oh, okay, there we go. I'm starting to catch on now.
you know what?
Yes, now I can see it. And you can click start captioning.
Okie dokie.
Test something.
Testing, testing.
Okay, that's working.
Okay, yes, okay.
Switch back.
Sweet.
Switch over to whatever window. Nah.
No, you still got it. You have to set it specifically just to capture the one window, not the entire stream. Or the entire screen.
How's it doing that? Let's see.
When you hit share, go ahead and stop sharing screen. When you hit share screen, you will have two options. One says specific window, and one says whole stream or whole screen.
I have screen and screen 1. Let's see. I have applications and screen says screen 1.
Okay, ignore the one that says screen. Just do the one that says applications.
Okay, then I have the web captioner, the Google Chrome.
Select that. If it's in its own tab in its own window, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then I say go live,
Yes.
and then you should now be seeing just that
Yes.
while I read the other thing. Okay.
It's not capturing your voice right now. Okay, now it is.
Oh, actually, yeah, it may be. Try it again.
is.
Say something.
Testing, testing. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society.
Okay,
This
it's
is
not.
Google.
It's not doing anything.
It's not gonna work. Okay, you know what?
Okay,
let's
wait.
just try this later.
Actually, I have another idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, do the same thing.
Oh, okay. Screen. Okay. Back up.
So, chat, how are we all doing? Everyone having fun?
Okay, now the window where you have the thing you're reading from,
Yes.
put that up and make it smaller
Okay.
so that it's overlapping.
Let's see. Stream settings.
No, why are you going to stream settings?
Sorry. Okay, I'm in the caption. Let's see. Setting. I'm in the caption window now. It's reading my text.
Okay.
Mm.
Now open up the window that you have, what you're reading from on it.
Gotcha.
Are you looking at that window?
Yes, but it's not coming in. It's stuck on the Discord.
How is it stuck on the Discord?
I don't know. Let me see. You're talking about the major window that
I'm
comes up
talking
when-
about what window are you personally looking at right now?
I'm looking at the web caption window.
Well, open up the window where you're looking at the creepypasta that you're going to read.
Okay, gotcha. Here we go.
Okay,
Okay.
now say something.
Hello, folks.
Can
How's
you?
it going?
Okay, make the window with the creepypasta on it smaller.
Yeah. Yep.
Make it not full screen. Okay, is it not full screen?
Yes, it's not full screen.
And can
Can
you
you still
read it?
read it?
Checking it out now, and no. Shoot. One second.
You can't read it at all?
It's just, hold on, I'm stretching out just a little bit. Okay, there we go. Now I can read it.
Yeah. You just need to make sure that the capture window is not completely inactive, or else it won't update.
Okay, I think we've licked it.
All right.
Alright. I'm gonna mute myself. GC, you have the floor. Use it
Awesome.
wisely.
I will use it wisely. And this is the, again, submitted for approval to Midnight Society. This story is known as... Halloween Monster? No. The New Arcade in Town. This is the first time I've told anyone the story, and it may be the last because they found me. The year was 1994. I was a 15-year-old who lived in a small town, mainly dominated by churchgoers and elderly couples who didn't get along, so there was never much to do. The only things that captured my attention were video games. They were pretty basic at the time, but my family wasn't well enough to purchase such a luxury as a home gaming system. It was the middle of summer when talk started to spread off a penny arcade moving into the building where the old videotape store was at. My friend and I, well, we'll call him Terry, were beyond excited, seeing as it was a much more economically friendly option for us and to our parents to get a chance to play a video game straight out of my gaming magazines. The posters all around town, all bright and playful, detailed that the arcade was still open Sunday at 9 a.m., which was incredibly convenient because Terry and I already planned a sleepover that Saturday night. I brought my magazines to Terry's because his mom wasn't willing to spend money on gimmicks like that. We stayed up into the early hours of the morning, flipping through them over and over, until we had drilled every game made to date in our heads. Eventually, we both passed out at the floor, lights on, magazines out, and minds full of wonder. And I woke up to the sound of Terry's mom leaving for her weekly church service, looked to the wall and read the clock, 8:06 a.m., wanting to get there early so we could be the first in line. I woke Terry and told him to get ready. We both took showers, changed out of yesterday's attire into something more fresh, and snagged some change that Terry's mom had left us on the kitchen counter before we ran out the door, opened the clock, 8:47 a.m. It took us about 10 minutes to walk there. When we approached the line up at the door, there was only a handful of people there, no kids our age, just some holder social rejects who had nothing better to do. We jumped in the line, secured our spot as the fourth or fifth person in the entire arcade. We kept our eyes at the arcade front window to block out our eyes from the sun, and what we saw blew our 15-year-old minds. Rows and rows of arcade games. Something caught my eye though. A two large double door with the writing, "The Virtual Reality Experience." To hear those words, virtual and reality, in the same sentence came back that it made absolutely no sense to me, so intrigued me to the point of making it at the top of our agenda of what to do at 9 o'clock when the doors opened. The arcade game sprung to life in a fantasy display of lights and color, and the doors opened. A bald man with a scar on the side of his head walked out and gestured to the small lineup that we could now enter. As I walked past him, he gave me a blank stare that gave me an extremely uneasy feeling, though. We continued through the door and into the fantastic space full of lights and sounds that excite Terry and I even more. Without a word, we both ran to the large double doors and pushed them open. They were surprisingly light, and we both stumbled into the room. There was a bald woman with a scar on her head standing next to the table with multiple bulky circular gadgets on it. We both stood up straight, slightly embarrassed, and proceeded towards her. She held out her left hand and silently pointed to the paper on the table with her right. 2 quarters per player for the most immersive gaming experience in this day and age. Fight off the alien race that is attacking the moon base. You are its only hope. Terry took out his mom's coins and handed them over to $1 in exchange to the bald woman. She blankly took the money and grabbed one of the bulky circular gadgets on the table, gesturing for us to do so as well. We both grabbed one and watched as she placed it on her head, surrounded by like a helmet. We wanted to do the same, but she gestured for us not to. She went through a side door and came back with 2 Star Wars blaster-looking devices. Terry and I excitedly snagged them from her hand and examined them in awe. They were surprisingly heavy. The woman pressed a button on the thick metal door, slid open. She walked through it, and we followed attentively. walking down a flight of stairs, we came to a long, narrow hallway, which led to even more stairs. We came to an incredibly large room, other than the black and red striped door to the other side of it. The walls of the entire room were covered in opaque glass-like substance. Terry and I shied each other excited glances as we proceeded in the middle of the room, and the woman helped us equip the helmet and blasters. We couldn't see anything. Thinking this was some sort of joke, I was about to take off my helmet when it came to life. The screen inside the helmet lit up, and I looked around to see a totally different place than the strange room before. We were on the moon, outside a building with Canadian flags on it. I looked towards Terry when he was in an astronaut suit, bearing the same blaster as before. I heard a screeching ring out through my helmet that made me and Terry jump, though. Sounds on the moon? Oh well. It was a video game after all. We turned towards the origin of the horror sound, and to see what I can only describe as a true monster. It was lanky and crawled on 4 legs. My first thought was that it was the face that was made up of only 2 deep black holes, presumably to be eyes. It looked sickly and injured as it moved toward the 2 of us. Its face opened up to form a mouth that bore rows of razor-sharp teeth. It paused in advance and stood up on its hind legs, exposing claws that looked as if they could slice through the human flesh like butter. It lunged towards it with surprisingly speed. I froze. Time felt slow as I watched the monster gracefully soar through the air towards me, mouth open, claws that stretched. It was suddenly violently knocked to one side as a rod of red flare blew a chunk out of its torso and sent it flying. I looked at Terry and saw his barrel smoking. The brief moment of surprise was interrupted by more shrieks from other monsters in the distance. Shaken up from almost losing the game in its first moments, it took me a second to understand the situation. Protect the space station, kill monsters, stay alive, easy enough. A burst of adrenaline hit me as the monsters came into view over the craters and hills. There are at least 20, and they weren't crawling like the last one, but rather running towards us on 2 legs, sporadically waving their claws around, every limb on their body seamlessly twitching every second or 2 without hesitation. Terry and I started to use our weapons against them, and they got about 10 meters away before the last one collapsed to the ground, motionless. More monster screams came from behind them, nearly upon us. Too many to specifically say. Terry and I just began to fire uncontrollably into the mob of creatures they stampeded towards us. Terry was firing at the ones in front of me, and as was I realized too late that Terry's actions were foolish. As monsters poured onto him, covering from view, he screamed in pain, firing wider than the creatures that were in front of him, and I managed to take down enough of them that they started to back up, realizing that I was the threat. They crawled back over the hills and craters, revealing Terry's body motionless on the ground. I had to stare at him for a minute or so, contemplating what to, and when I thought about it much deeper, groggy and shrieking echoed through the air. I turned to see a creature, larger than the others, slowly striding on 2 legs across the lunar surface towards me. Its claws were noticeably longer, and its teeth curled inwards. I switched my focus from Terry to the monster, and just as I did, it stopped advancing on me. I turned to the right and started to walk towards the horizon. It stopped, again, lifted up its nightmarish claws and slashed into nothing. But as I did this, what I can only describe as a rip in the air formed. It kept striking until the rip turned into a hole. It disappeared into the hole, and then I stood there confused. I heard screams, both from humans and ruined electronics. For a split second, the message error: 00001 / power removed was displayed in front of me. Then everything suddenly went dark. I waited a few minutes before taking off my helmet and saw what I can only describe as absolute carnage. Creatures with chunks blown out of them were scattered everywhere across the large room, surrounded by pools of yellow ooze. I looked at my feet to see Terry laying on the ground with various lacerated litterings on his body, and crouching down, I took off his helmet. He was dead. The shock of my best friend's death was interrupted by the walls opening and more monsters surging out. Instinctively, I raised the blaster and started firing, and it worked just as well as it had in the game. Dropping as they came out, the hole kept them at bay. Finally, they stopped coming, and I stared at the gap in the wall. No more emerged from the darkness beyond the glass opening. I looked around the room to notice that the black and red striped door had been ripped down. Realizing this was my only exit, I moved to it and walked through the remains of the door. I was now in some sort of control room. Bald male bodies were scattered around the room, with blood covered most of the floor. All electronics in the room had been destroyed, all bearing huge claw marks. The silence of the room was interrupted by movement behind me, and the largest of the creatures emerged from the dark hallway. hunched over to fit through the gap, the baring teeth and claws. It approached me with the same deep, groggy scream I heard before. Without even questioning my actions, I pulled out the blaster and sprayed across the room at the horrifying creature. It cowered into the darkness from which it came, and I heard it scampering down the hallways until the sound faded to nothing. I walked towards the darkness, blaster drawn, and was swallowed by it. I felt my way through the black hallways and up staircase for what I felt like an eternity, and occasionally feeling long scratches in the walls left by the monster. Low growls and metallic bangs echoed through the unexplored corridors, and my curiosity was cut short when I turned the corner to see lights coming from a smashed window high above the floor. The wall and floor was littered with long scratch marks, yellow ooze, and broken glass. I moved up the staircase to come into a small room filled with blasters and a slightly open door. Peeking through, I saw the woman who had directed Terry to me into this horrible mess. I burst through, aimed my blaster, and held the trigger until she was unrecognizable, and my mind numbed with the pure rage of my best friend's death. From nowhere, bald men swarmed to the scene, and I stood there with cuts, bruises, and yellow ooze and blood covered my body, and as they all blankly stared at me, shoving through the crowd, I ran out of the arcade, blaster to hand. That was 20 years ago, and the bald, scared men have been pursuing me ever since. I often think about the time Terry and I spent in the game, how I could have played out so differently. If not for him, we would have died in the horrible place. I tried telling others, but I gave up long ago for everyone thinks I'm mad. I went out west of the coast, but it doesn't matter how far I go, they always seem to catch up to me. I see them walking down the streets, in restaurants, even on television. I swear one of them looked like Terry. Sometimes, at night, I hear the shrieks of that monster in the distance. I fear that my time might be short. As I write this, there was a bald, scared man sitting under the light of the bus right across the street, blankly staring at me. I could hear scratching noises at my back door, accompanied by the occasional low, groggy moan. I'm gonna die here. And that's it.
Spooky.
Not really what I expected, but that was actually pretty good. And Canadians were the first man on the moon.
Canadians were the first man on the moon. Well,
That caught me on nowhere. That was funny.
Jonas, is your thing that you're testing working the way you thought it would?
Because of the funny routing on my preamp, it's seeing all of us as a single source, and the captioning function seems to be also captioning all of us right now as I speak.
Cool. Can you stream that?
I believe I can. Hold on 1 second. Let me just set things up here as they should be. I believe I'm going to be... Wait 1 second. Okay. And... Test.
Test.
Do you see it?
Good question. Let me... You can stop streaming your screen now, I believe, GC.
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, stop streaming.
Well, I see my words appearing. That's cool.
Potato, pineapple. Let me get some of that sweet pineapple.
Well, okay, yeah, this should absolutely do it. We shouldn't need to switch to anyone else's stream. Cool.
The only caveat is that if we speak at the same time, we might confuse it. And you also need to be fairly... I'll adjust everyone's levels as necessary, but you have to be fairly articulate. It seems to be rather sensitive to volume levels.
Well, regardless, it's working, so cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. So... I guess I can go. Oh, Jonas.
Oh! in another tab?
Don't pull GC.
You gotta have that tab always where you're capturing, and you have two monitors, right?
Yeah. Okay. Give me 1 second. Let me just.
All right.
Think. Hang on. Okay. Are we good?
I believe so.
Okay.
Looks like it is.
So wait, if I go to another, like a separate window, will it still caption me?
Try it. Let's see.
Short.
Test. Okay, it's still capturing me. Go.
Okay, cool. We've licked this problem at the moment.
We've beaten Skynet.
I like how it says leave.
Yeah, right?
Okay.
Let me know if it stops, okay? Just let me know if it poops out.
Alright, so I have a little poem I would like to share with you all. A very famous poem. It's appropriate for the night.
Okay.
And it was mentioned, it was requested a couple of nights ago, and I'm always a sucker for busting this out. And as I've said, I have a flex to make for this one, so
Busting it out. Very good.
I'm busting it out. So let me know when y'all are ready for me to begin.
Okay.
Get me a little drink of water. Lovely. It's like the blood of the earth. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society, or perhaps I should say the Rick Knight Society. This would be The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, as read by yours truly, Stoker Bramwell. Once upon a midnight dreary, as I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here, forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now to still the beating of my heart I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, or madam, "truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flit and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door. Perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. Perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such name as nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore. But, the raven still beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, nevermore. This I sat, engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er. But whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee respite, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still of bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still of bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul of sorrow laden, if within the distant Aiden it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels named Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, still is sitting, on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul, from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor, shall be lifted nevermore.
Wow.
Never heard the short story before. That's good.
Hey, Stoker.
Yes?
I'm sending you some just a very small snippet of lyrics that I want you to read in the Poe voice. This is from a Blues Traveler song.
Alright, I will do that, but I have to do my flex on this, okay?
Do your flex.
My flex on reading The Raven just now is that I was not reading it. That was all from memory.
Nice. Oh, you're insane.
I memorized that in high school, and I have never forgotten it.
Nutcase.
I admire your dedication on that one, Stoker. I would out a book.
You're crazy, man.
Alright. I'm gonna read this thing. You read me. Okay, you linked me, okay, Jonas?
This is Run Around by Blues
And you
Traveler.
want me to do this in the same voice I did that one.
It's gonna be
Okay.
fun.
Oh, once upon midnight eerie, I woke with something in my head. I couldn't escape the memory of a phone call and of what you said. Like a game show contestant with a parting gift, I could not believe my eyes when I saw through the thoughts of a trusted friend who needs to humor me and tell me lies. Yeah, humor me and tell me lies.
I'm sorry. I had to because. Anyway.
Okay, so yeah, that was that's
Does this sound like a Poe poem? You know? Anyway.
first line is obviously the Raven, or ripping on the Raven, but the rest not so much.
Anyway. Does anyone want to go, or shall I?
I can go.
It's
Oh, Rick.
what'd you say, Rick?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, in that case, regardless, I'm muting.
Yeah, only two.
Okay. So I'm assuming this isn't set to actually go to another line. Okay. This is A Trick of Perspective by Matt Dymerski. They're very good at hiding in plain sight. The human brain only perceives summaries and expectations, and they use that to their utmost advantage. A man in a gorilla costume can walk across a video of athletes passing basketballs without the viewer noticing. The creatures I'm talking about can skitter right on by when they know you won't be paying attention. Your awareness is their plaything. Ever thought you saw a face in the shadows? You absolutely did, and it was watching you right back. They're not magic, and they're not spirits. They are physically present with bodies you might accidentally brush up against, and probably have. That's the key, though, and their primary strength. You just don't realize it when it happens. Even if you somehow sense you're not alone and you become alert, you'll expect the warm limb of a human assailant or the chill void of a ghost, but neither trigger will come. Truth is, you could be backed up against one right at this moment and you wouldn't know it, because the brain interprets most every sensation as something familiar and benign. You could turn your head, and the entity behind you would have already anticipated that, and moved to the next place you're not looking. The damn thing's not even quiet. You just don't know what to listen for. Imagine this. Go back to a memory of a sunny day and recall a bird chirping outside your window. Yes, it's daytime. Did you think light would save you? The creatures in question have no association with shadows and darkness. If they did, I might hazard a guess as to what the hell they are. No, there's no easy safety in light here. Now, the same way you hear a spoken word and slowly transform it into another word in your mind's eye by analyzing and reanalyzing it, listen to that chirping bird. You didn't even notice it before, did you? Deprioritized by your traitor neurons, it slid right past your awareness. A foreign stranger speaks a word with a heavy accent. At first it means nothing. You frown, you concentrate, and you look at his moving mouth for clues. Moment to moment, the word changes shape as you turn it and study it. Suddenly you have it. You smile in agreement, and from that point on, the memory of his first speaking has changed. You can't hold on to what you first thought you heard. Your brain has literally edited your understanding of your present and your past. But what if the choice it made was wrong? There's every possibility the chirps you heard outside your window on that summer day can morph the same way, back to what they really were. Don't think too hard on it. I first became aware of their existence when I was 14. As I've laid out, they're extremely good at hiding in plain sight, but every process has a non-zero failure rate. It might be 1 in a million, or even 1 in a billion, but it will happen. I was that unlucky failure. There was still half of the backyard left to mow, and my interest did not extend beyond finishing my torturous chore and running back to my video games. I was innocent. I was just a kid. I was listening to the birds chirping on a summer day. My mind wandered. I thought of my future in some unknown college. I thought of my past as a young child enough to avoid chores, and I thought of my present. The birds didn't have any responsibilities. They just hung out all day, flew around as they pleased, and talked all the time in song. Nobody else would have randomly focused on the lilting sounds the way I did. I didn't stop to listen more closely. I didn't look around and smile at the beautiful weather. I just kept my eyes ahead of the mower and tried to hear what I could hear over the roar of its engine. I gave no outward indication whatsoever that my attention had shifted, and that was what led to its mistake. The longer my mind delved down beneath the blanketing sound of the mower, the more I could hear the birds. The closer I focused on the birds, the more I lost hold of the sound in my mind. It was very close to typical bird song at first, but then continually lost fractions of its normalcy and beauty the second by second until it became distorted, alien, and haunting. I could understand how I'd thought I was listening to birds, but now I struggled to process what sounded like wind moving through a series of twisted holes designed to mimic other noises in the environment. My mind's eye envisioned a strange organic stick of some sort, hollow in many avian ways, but whose bones and hole-ringing muscles were open to air to allow aural camouflage. This image came to me as if from some half-forgotten nightmare, nausea-inducing, imminently threatening, and vaguely familiar. My moment of unconscious action came when I realized there was no breeze. To make continual noises like that, the unknown bone and muscle stick would have to be moving. To be moving, it would have to be a leg. I erupted from my blank-stared focus without a moment's warning and flung my arm around faster than I could look. My hand closed on what I immediately recognized as a tree branch, and I was already relaxing in that split second that it took to swing my vision around to see what No. I'd only thought it was a tree branch. It had presented that texture to me by tensing mottled patches of skin, clinging to the black exoskeletal bone I'd gripped. I stared in awe and horror as it rotated interpretations in front of me. An umbrella that last night's storm had thrown in from a neighbor's yard, a large bush that I had somehow forgotten about, and even a stick I'd managed to blindly catch right out of a surprised dust devil. But I wasn't letting go. Rings of muscle closed around some of my fingers, bringing that horrible nightmare-born image right back to the forefront of my awareness, and I knew the thing was alive and aware. It jerked away twice, escaping on the second, and I stared after it as the shifting shadows of clouds made a weird pattern between the houses and a truck drove by on the road until it was out of sight. Both this pattern and the truck had been tricks of perspective. I grabbed my head and struggled with the memories. My brain wanted to interpret them away, but I knew I had to hold on. I'd just seen something horrible beyond understanding, and I couldn't let that knowledge sink under my stream of consciousness and vanish. I managed to get inside the house and write down what I could before I became too unsure of myself. How had it so expertly presented stimuli of colors, light, and sound to me that I nearly interpreted away my awareness of it? I came to the conclusion that it had been watching me in particular for quite some time, and learning my senses, my behavior, and the lay of my nervous system. What else could I believe? If it was just that good at manipulating everyone all the time, what hope did I have of figuring out what it was? I looked things up on the internet most of the night, but found no real corroborating stories. The next morning, I came up against its second line of defense. Memories, imaginings, and dreams are all indistinguishable. In the safety of my bed, the nightmarish encounter seemed nothing but a fleeting series of random sensations. Had I dreamed it? The lawnmower remained halfway across the backyard, its job unfinished. It had happened. I went out there and completed my chore before my father noticed the unfinished task, but I remained wary at all times. There was no way to know if that creature had been real, but if so, there was a good possibility it was hostile. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, and every sound made me jump. For weeks, I was stressed beyond belief, and there was nobody I could tell. Each day began blurring into the next, as they tend to do, and I was eventually forced to relax my guard. Without proof, there was no other choice. Thinking back on it, I wasn't able to be sure it had been real. The mutable nature of memory continually stole details away from me until all I had was a story I kept telling myself about what had happened. When the only thing you have left to believe is your own insistence that something insane occurred, well, that's when you have to worry about being crazy. Occasionally, I would still go down unexpected streets or look in random directions, but these actions produced no results. If the creature had been real, it had probably taken my unexpected randomness into account after the first failure. Or maybe it was staying away from me to avoid giving me a chance to be certain. Once was an inexplicable and weird experience. Twice would be a prompt for action. As bad luck would have it, I'd been right about two things. There were more than one of them, and they did adapt to specific people and communities. That was the cause of my second experience. I was 20 and in college by then, and had firmly put the whole thing behind me as a sort of scary story I brewed up as a child. My friends and I had gone camping, and we were deep in the woods of a state park, sitting around a fire at night. There was nothing around but flames, the beers, my friend, our tents, and trees, until a falling meteor lit up the night as it burned out just above the distant horizon. My friends all reeled and cheered. I just stared across the fire at the darkness in the woods beyond. The meteor had been a totally unpredictable event, not predicated on the actions of any earthly being, and thus our silent watcher had been slow to adjust. Under the meteor's 3 seconds of shifting light, I stared directly into the complex, multi-orbed eyes of the enemy. Did it know that I knew? Did it see light the way we did? In many unintentional ways, I had prepared for this moment for years. I kept my heart rate and breathing normal and made no move, not even with my eyes, that might give away my awareness. And now I was certain. In that single moment, years of self-doubt and cognitive dissonance vanished. But the creature had not come for me. I drank beers and told stories and laughed with the rest of the group, while secretly amazed at how blatantly obvious the thing was now that I had noticed it. It often circled the camp in the darkness, and with the corner of my sight, I kept track of it until I knew who it was most interested in. One of our friends was the governor's son, a fact that he made known often and loudly, but the person most often studied was actually his girlfriend. Now I had become the secret observer. I did not intervene as she walked off into the woods to look for the campground's outhouse, and it followed. She didn't come back. Her boyfriend had passed out by that time, and our group had begun the process of splitting up into different tents. Her absence was not truly noticed until the next morning. I was not stupid enough to mention what I knew to the police. They figured she'd wandered off into the forest and gotten lost and hurt, and I certainly wasn't going to tell them I'd seen a living horror follow her into the darkness. They sent out some search parties, but as I expected, they found no trace of her. The case was closed, and the official story was that she had likely run off on purpose to start a new life. The biggest concern that tumbled around in my thoughts that year was, why her, and why not me? I'd grabbed one, even seen it face to face, and it had retreated. She wasn't a danger to them. Well, I'd known about them for years. Or perhaps my previous uncertainty had meant I was not a threat. As I studied to be an engineer, I realized that every system had a failure rate. I couldn't be the only one that had seen them, and they couldn't simply eliminate every single person who did. There were many layers of defense, most of all the lack of proof and fallibility of memory. And I had to guess that many people had seen something strange or inexplicable in their lives, but written it off later out of confusion. After all, normal people didn't want to believe that such horrific creatures existed, let alone that they walked freely around the streets of neighborhoods of mankind. And walk freely they did. Now that I knew what to look and listen for, I began to sense them almost everywhere. They stood most often in places that were close but untrodden, grass islands and parking lots, walkways between buildings and higher rooftops. They could fold their 8 limbs and disjointed bodies into strange shapes and adjust their appearance and texture to blend in. The most astounding ability I observed was the fact that they could adjust to multiple people at once. I talked to a friend on the way to class while I observed a nearby creature using light and shade from my perspective at one angle, and a different pattern laid on its folded-up body from my friend's perspective to create a multifaceted optical illusion that words simply can't do justice to. It was these camouflage tactics that tactics that the creatures used, along with incredibly intimate knowledge of each person's particular senses to hide in plain sight as a tree, a shadow, a car, or anything else they somehow knew would be instinctively written off and ignored. But they didn't always hide. Saying and doing nothing, I watched as they took 2 more people I vaguely knew over the next 4 years. These weren't direct acquaintances, but people I suddenly chose to be around more often because of the increased activity of the creatures around them. In fact, the more I came to understand these strange beasts, the more I was able to evade and watch them myself in exactly the manner they had once done to me. About 48 hours before a disappearance, 3 of the creatures would visit the person in question, and that person's handler, to closely examine something about him or her. I managed to get there before the process began for the 4th time in my experience, and I hid 2 yards over in a dense group of trees and watched with binoculars. While one creature waited and watched in the corner of the bedroom, the visiting triad leaned over the sleeping girl and did something delicate with their long appendages. While most of the segments of their limbs were fully of exposed muscle and air holes for stealthy movements, the endpoints were incredibly sharp, almost surgical. It was at that moment that 2 questions presented themselves to me. First, what did I really think I could do about this, even if I logged enough of their behavior to create proof? They could simply eliminate me if I spoke up. Second, how did these creatures know their victims would be somewhere alone 48 hours from that moment? Without fail, even though the decision sometimes seemed random, these people ended up somewhere solitary. It wasn't mind control, it was worse. Everything the creatures did was about data and prediction. As a full-time engineer for several years by that point, I had begun to understand what they were doing. A human being has a capacity for creativity and inspiration, but we are, each of us, largely predictable in our daily lives. Watch someone long enough and you can guess at their future actions. This girl had been watched for a very long time, and they knew she would be alone and vulnerable in 48 hours. It was always done in such a way that no mysteries were left behind. If she was asleep in her bed in a locked house, a disappearance would raise questions. Keeping incognito in a large coat and low hat, I watched her for the next 2 days, noting her handler's subtle, new quivering behavior. Was it excited? The thought of that thing growing excited for whatever it was about to do turned my fear into anger. The hour approached. She was up later than usual because she'd been at a bar with friends, and now she was walking home by herself. Other drunk people were on the street with her. How did they intend to? Her phone rang. Answering it, she turned left down a quieter street. She spoke to someone she liked on the other end. It was not a trick. How the hell had they predicted that? Just how deep did their data extend? My mind ran endlessly over the insane requirements of it all. They would have to have complete behavior profiles not just for the girl and her caller, but for every drunk on the street, every person who had been at the bar, and every driver in the area. Of course they had long-term and detailed data on all of those people. It was what they did. It was all they did. Day in and day out, slinking around behind us, watching, logging, studying. The bastards knew everything about us. I shouted a warning. The girl turned around suddenly and stared right into the face of her attacker. Smooth chitinous plates over unidentified pulsing fleshly sacs and nodes, all set under complex insectoid eyes. Obviously, she screamed. It didn't go after her as she ran for her life. Instead, it whipped its head around and stood high on its segmented limbs. Creatures were unusually low or folded in some manner, so the sight of it cresting 10 feet high broke my resolve, and I, too, ran. A strange call went out, much like the horn of a truck, and I knew it was calling others to the hunt. I had enough wherewithal to realize that running into the chill night would mean death. I dashed onto the street, and slowed to a walk among the drunks leaving the bars in loud and laughing groups. My jacket was bulky, and the brim of my hat mostly hid my face. Would the creatures know who I was? I altered my gait and focused on the unconscious behaviors of my body in an attempt to avoid fitting any data they had on me. Would my very pattern of breathing give me away? But the drunks were not the defense I thought they were. Their attention was minimal and scattered, and multiple shadows began lurking at the edges of my oasis, moving inexorably closer as they found vectors where nobody was paying attention. They could pick me right out from the middle of the crowd, and the drunks would never notice. I needed inspiration. Another group stumbled out of a nearby bar and merged with ours in a stream. I punched one direction and moved another within the sea of people. Men began shoving and shouting, and I ducked, slipped my jacket and hat off, and left them on the street. I laughed and shouted along with the other human beings around. It was time to see how well my pursuers could pay attention. My joviality became real as the tightening noose slackened. These were field observers, not the data handlers, and they didn't have profiles to compare with each of us to root out which one of us had been the deviant. Every single one of us was sweaty, red-faced, loud, and kinetic. A man in a gorilla suit could have walked through us at that moment without the creatures noticing. All I needed to do was drift away, as all the bar-goers eventually did, and if I wasn't followed, I was home free. Of the 24 of us out there on the orange-lit sidewalk, the 4 creatures would have to choose only a 6th of us to follow. Those were better odds than I could have hoped for. But my luck came up short. One of them slipped after me as I split away from the crowd. I couldn't return home and let it know who I was. Worse, it had freedom now to get creative. Took on the flashing blue and red qualities of an approaching police cruiser in the corner of my vision, just enough to get a normal drunk to turn around in surprise, and it knew it had me when I panicked and ran instead. I ducked under a rusted fence, dashed through a construction area, and took many hard turns in a suburban area, but I eventually found myself knocked to my knees in a dark yard. Shadow of the monstrous creature loomed over me, and I felt the surgically sharp end of one of its limbs traced gently across my throat, just enough to scrape, but not to kill. With that, it departed. At first I was terrified and confused, but then I understood. They knew who I was now. They didn't need to kill me. My little rebellion had been cut short because my hidden behavior would now be included in their data. I would never be able to interfere again. What to do then? I've waited and watched for a number of years since, now only aware of disappearances through internet articles and social media posts. I go to my job, I work, I go home, and I watch TV. I've dated. I assume I'll get married and have kids someday. But always they lurk, watching, waiting, and surgically slicing away specific people from the fabric of our communities. I write this now because of an offhand comment from an old acquaintance I ran into this week. It was at the governor's son I used to hang out with, and he told me that his father had been considering running for Senate all those years ago, but had opted not to because of our friend's disappearance in the woods. Now that speaks to me of something far greater and far more sinister than I even guessed at. How far ahead do they see? How long have they been watching us, editing us? We might rise up enraged as a species if glorious world leaders or local kind-hearted souls were to disappear, but we think nothing of the impact the removal of unimportant individuals have on those around them. Before the person who might save us from these creatures can even become a leader, someone close to them and important to them can be excised, and therefore none of us are the wiser that we've lost someone amazing. I know now why they let me live, and even why they're letting me write this. First, they seek submission and hopelessness, and I have long submitted and given up hope. Second, they know you won't believe me, and they know that, even if you did, you would submit and give up hope too. You are like me, bandied about in a world of apathy, distraction, and pointlessness. On the off chance you feel like doing something about it, don't. Don't look behind you, don't start paying attention, most of all, don't start thinking about why things are the way they are. If you're the type of person who might wake up and look around, I guarantee there are eyes on you at this very moment, and those ghastly eyes see more than you ever will. They know absolutely everything about you, and can punish you before you even begin to attempt to resist. As for how to pass the time in our shared invisible captivity, I can recommend some really great TV shows.
I really like the way that ended.
Wow. Nice. I like the concept. I don't like the Mary Sue.
Rick, would you mind linking that to me, or just dropping it into the channel or something?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Can we, everyone, so far, can we get these linked in the chat, or at least the titles dropped, so everyone can look them up? GC, what was yours called?
You're still muted, GC.
Oh no, he's dead!
Hello? Sorry about that. I had to turn the lights out, but yeah, I'm still listening, but the name of the story was... Let me get it again. The new arcade in town, that's right.
Oh. The new arcade in town, okay. And Rick, what was yours called?
Hold on a second.
Here, let me pause captioning for a minute since we're not actually telling a story right now.
Well, I mean, actually, we're still having, like, conversations, and also I'm really, really, really amused how the captioning can't tell us apart, and I'm just looking at it on the screen.
Not everything in Discord is being read through that.
Mine was called A Trick of Perspective, but
Yes, you did mention that. Okay.
I'm not sure if it's available on the internet because I'm reading it out of a creepypasta collection.
Oh, well, look at you! Look at you bringing the printed material.
I can't find it. Oh well. Okay.
Well, it's funny. I'm looking at these captions. They're really good in some ways and really terrible in others.
Considering that this is progress, you know, the fact that this exists is progress. It's buggy, but I mean, you know,
It's also a free thing on the internet, and it's not like
Yeah,
a massive project, so...
yeah,
It's-
absolutely.
it's definitely dependent to some degree on input volume, which I'm working on. I'm trying to keep all you at like a nice level that it tolerates.
You're a nice level that I tolerate.
It's rude. Anyway, does anyone want to go next, or?
So it's
You
me or-
seem... I was gonna say, Jonas, you seem kind of eager to go next.
I wouldn't mind. Okay. Well, all right. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. This story is called Distorted Warning Signals. When I got the first one, I was literally seconds away from stepping onto the plane when a call from unknown blared from my cell phone. It was a ringtone I hadn't heard before, one I was pretty sure hadn't come with the phone. Normally, I wouldn't have stopped to answer it, but I was expecting a call about a job I'd interviewed for the previous week. I took a deep breath and accepted the call. Hello? Do not get on the plane. A woman's voice, garbled and strange, as if her vocal cords had been shredded, and she was trying desperately to choke out speech. Despite the unnerving, fractured quality of her voice, her tone was insistent and eerily calm. Then the call ended. I froze. I had always had a slight phobia of air travel, and something about this call just... There's no way I was about to get on a 7-hour flight now. I turned around and headed toward the food court. I'd just get another flight in later in the afternoon, I figured. I watched from the airport Starbucks 3 hours later as every TV in the terminal lit up with the crash footage of the plane I should have been on. No survivors. Not a single one. I tried to trace the call. So did the police. But there was nothing to trace. There was no evidence my phone had ever received a call around that time. They analyzed phone records, incoming and outgoing communication to my phone. Nothing. I wasn't making it up. I couldn't have been. That wasn't the only call. Throughout the years, they were few and far between, but always right, and I always listened. Do not go on that blind date tonight. 5 months later, my would-be date was convicted of killing 4 women, all with my hair color and build. Found them in a shallow grave about 250 feet from the diner he offered to take me to. Do not drive to the concert tonight. 18-wheeler lost control and plowed into a line of cars. Every driver crushed. Every driver killed. In the stretch of freeway I would have been driving down. No matter if I got a new phone, if I moved across the country, the calls would still come. I could almost feel the presence of whatever it was, whoever it was, watching over me. I imagined being at the bottom of the freezing ocean, still strapped into my coach section plane seat, or being in that mass grave across from the diner, or watching an 18-wheeler skidding towards my car, knowing death was imminent, and I'd get this tightness in my chest. I think about how thin that line was, how close I'd gotten. If I hadn't had a job interview I was waiting to hear back from, I'd have never listened to that first call, and that would be it for me. It always felt like something was coming for me, but there was always this fractured, warped voice with these calls that never seemed to exist after I heard them. Self-destructing warning signals, rotting away before my eyes, and I was alive. I had a bad feeling about this cruise. I had planned it as a girls' week out with some of my old friends from college, and I was looking forward to a week in the tropics in the dead of winter. But part of me could almost sense that call was coming. Maybe I'd watched Titanic one too many times, but there is a little nagging fear from the start. I hoped it would be fine, but I knew that if something was going to happen, I'd get the call. I'd know. Now, a week before I'm set to go on the cruise, after stepping into my apartment after returning from dinner with a friend, I notice my call has a message from unknown. They've never had to leave a message before. Haven't checked it all night. Damn it, and I really wanted to go on that cruise, too. Oh well, not worth whatever horrific fate awaited me in that cold, dark ocean. I click play message, and feel my stomach drop as I listen to the voice, sounding horrifically distorted, as if it emanates from a throat slashed to ribbons, crackling with more urgency than ever before. I look around my apartment as the voice on the phone repeats the same phrase over and over again. Do not come home after dinner tonight. Do not come home after dinner tonight. Do not come home after dinner tonight. That's it.
Sometimes these end so suddenly that I'm not 100% sure they're over.
That was a little. It was kind of a short one, wasn't it? But it was. But I thought it was kind of eerie. I liked it.
Yeah, it is a little eerie. I like it too. Yeah, I'm into it. You haven't had a chance.
We're still
Oh,
good
sorry.
to that sudden ending. I really like that story. No, the ending. Oh, I hate when they do that.
Looking at the screen, I liked it, Larry. I like it.
I just look at you. I like it, Larry. Yeah, I like it. I'm into it.
It looked like it got about 80% of what I was saying.
Hey, that's better than nothing, especially as has been pointed out before, this is a free program.
Yeah.
Well, website, you know.
It's doing pretty good though. But like you said, if it doesn't seem to recognize when we're talking at the same time very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would be amazed if we see a captioning program in the next, 10 years that can pull that one off.
Mm-hmm.
Discord,
Even a premium one.
Discord should have something built in, really. But anyway.
It probably will at some point, and so will Twitch at some point. It's just probably low priority for them.
Yeah.
So, is it Miller time?
It sounds like it.
I think it's Miller time.
Go for
Do it.
All right.
Word is the word. I had to. I'm sorry.
For the submission of the approval of the Midnight Society, this is Palla. 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 I remember when I first heard that name, not long ago at all. It was at a Tails and Talos ball, the very fine state west of Mirkorup, to which I and my fellow Mage Guild mates, initiates, have found ourselves unexpectedly invited. Truth be told, we needn't have been too surprised. There were very few other noble families in Mirkorup. The region had its halcyon days as a resort for the wealthy far back in the Second Era. Reflection, it was only appropriate to have sorcerers and wizards present at a supernatural holiday. Not that we were anything more exotic than students at a small, non-exclusive charter house of the guild, but like I said, there was a paucity of other choices available. For close to a year, the only home I had known was the rather ramshackle, if sprawling grounds of the Mirkorup Mages Guild. My only companions were my fellow initiates, most of which only tolerated me and the masters, whose bitterness at being at a backwater guild prompted never-ending abuse. Immediately the school of illusion had attracted me. The magister who taught us recognized me as an apt pupil who loved not only the spells of the science, but their philosophical underpinnings. There was something about the idea of warping the imperceptible energies of light, sound, and mind that appealed to my nature. Not for me the flashy schools of destruction and alteration, the holy schools of restoration and conjuration, the practical schools of alchemy and enchantment, or the chaotic school of mysticism. No, I was never so pleased as to take an ordinary object and by a little magic make it seem something other than what it was. It would have taken more imagination than I had to apply that philosophy to my monotonous life. After the morning's lessons, we were assigned tasks before our evening classes. Mine had been to clean out the study of a recently deceased resident of the guild and categorize his clutter of spellbooks, charms, and incunabula. It was a lonely and tedious appointment. Magister Tindixis was an invertebrate, sorry, I think that's misspelled, collector of worthless junk, but I was reprimanded any time I threw something away of the least possible value. Gradually, I learned enough to deliver each of his belongings to the appropriate department. Potions of healing to the Magisters of Restoration, books on physical phenomena to the Magisters of Alteration, herbs and minerals to the alchemists, and soul gems and bound items to the enchanters. After one delivery to the enchanters, I was leaving with my customary lack of appreciation when Magister Ilther called me back. "Boy," said the portly old man, handing me back one item, "destroy this." It was a small black disc covered with runes with a ring of red-orange gems, like bones, circling its periphery. "I'm sorry, Magister," I stammered. "I thought it was something you'd be interested in." "Take it to the Great Flame and destroy it," he barked, turning his back on me. "You never brought it here." My interest was piqued, because I knew the only thing that could make him react in such a way. Necromancy. I went back to Magister Tindixis' chamber and pored through his notes, looking for any reference to the disc. Unfortunately, most of the notes had been written in a strange code that I was powerless to decipher. I was so fascinated by the mystery that I nearly arrived late for my evening class in enchantment, taught by Magister Ilther himself. For the next several weeks, I divided my time categorizing the general debris and making my deliveries, and researching the disc. I came to understand that my instinct was correct. The disc was a genuine necromantic artifact. Though I couldn't understand most of the Magister's notes, I determined that he thought it to be a means of resurrecting a loved one from the grave. Sadly, the time came when the chamber had been categorized and cleared, and I was given another assignment, assisting in the stables of the guild's menagerie. At least finally I was working with some of my fellow initiates. I had the opportunity of meeting the common folk and nobles who came to the guild on various errands. Thus was I employed when we were all invited to the Tales and Tallows ball. If the expected glamour of the evening were not enough, our hostess was reputed to be young, rich, unmarried orphan from Hammerfell, only a month or two before she moved to our desolate wooded corner of the Imperial Province to reclaim an old family manor house and grounds. The initiates of the guild gossiped like old women about the mysterious young lady's past, and what had happened to her parents, why she had left or been driven from her homeland. Her name was Bentaniki, and that was all we knew. We wore our robes of initiation with pride as we arrived for the ball. At the enormous marble foyer, a servant announced each of our names as if we were royalty, and we strutted into the midst of the revelers with great puffery. Of course, we were then promptly ignored by one and all. In essence, we were unimportant figures to lend some thickness to the ball. Background characters. The important people pushed through us with perfect politeness. There was old Lady Shardira discussing diplomatic appointments to Balmora with the Duke of Rimfarlin. An orc warlord entertained a giggling princess with tales of rape and pillaging. 3 of the guild magisters worried with painfully thin noble spinsters about the haunting of Daggerfall. Intrigues at the imperial and various royal courts were analyzed, gently mocked, fretted over, toasted, dismissed, evaluated, mitigated, admonished, subverted. No one looked our way, even when we were right next to them. It was as if my skill illusion had somehow rendered us all invisible. I took my flagon out to the terrace. The moons were doubled, equally luminous in the sky and in the enormous reflecting pool that stretched out into the garden. The white marble statuary lining the sides of the pool caught the fiery glow and seemed to burn like torches in the night. The sight was so otherworldly that I was mesmerized by it, and the strange red guard figures immortalized in stone. Our hostess had made her home there so recently that some of the sculptures were still wrapped in sheets that billowed and swayed in the gentle breeze. I don't know how long I stared before I realized I wasn't alone. She was so small and so dark, not only in her skin but in her clothing, that I nearly took her for a shadow. When she turned to me, I saw that she was very beautiful and young, not more than 17. "Are you our hostess?" I finally asked. "Yes," she smiled, blushing, "but I'm ashamed to admit that I'm very bad at it. I should be inside with my new neighbors, but I think we have very little in common." It's been made abundantly clear that they hope I have nothing in common with them either. When I'm a little higher than an initiate in the Mages Guild, they might see me as more equal. "I don't understand the concept of equality in Cyrodiil yet," she frowned. "In my culture, you proved your worth, not just expected wit. My parents both were great warriors, as I hope to be." Her eyes went out to the lawn, to the statues. "Do the sculptures represent your parents?" That's my father, Parium, there, she said, gesturing to a life-size representation of a massively built man, unashamedly naked, gripping another warrior by the throat and preparing to decapitate him with an outstretched blade. It was clearly a realistic depiction. Parium's face was plain, even slightly ugly, with a low forehead, a mass of tangled hair, stubble on his cheeks, even a slight gap in his teeth, which no sculptor would surely have invented, except to do justice to his model's true idiosyncrasies. And your mother? I asked, pointing to a nearby statue of a proud, rather squat warrior woman in a mantilla scarf, holding a child. Oh no, she laughed. That's my uncle's old nurse. Mother's statue still has a sheet over it. I don't know what prompted me to insist that we unveil the statue that she pointed to. In all likelihood, it was nothing but fate, and a selfish desire to continue the conversation. I was afraid that if I did not give her a project, she would feel the need to return to the party, and I would be alone again. At first she was reluctant. She had not made up her mind whether the statues would suffer in the wet, sometimes cold, cyrodiilic climate. Perhaps all should be covered, she reasoned. It may be that she was merely making conversation, and was reluctant, as I was, to end the standoff, and be that much closer to having to return to the party. In a few minutes' time, we tore the tarp from the statue of Bentaniki's mother. That is when my life changed forevermore. She was an untamed spirit of nature, screaming in a struggle with a misshapen, monstrous figure in black marble. Her gorgeous, long fingers were raking across the creature's face. The monster's talons gripped her right breast in a sort of caress that prefaces a mortal wound. Its legs and hers wound around one another in a battle that was a dance. I felt annihilated. This lithe but formidable woman was beautiful beyond all superficial standards. Whoever had sculpted it had somehow captured not only a face and figure of a goddess, but her power and will. She was both tragic and triumphant. I felt instantly and fatally in love with her. I had not even noticed when Galen, one of my fellow initiates who was leading the party, came up behind us. Apparently I had whispered the word magnificent, because I heard Bentaniki reply as if it miles away. Yes, it is magnificent. That's why I was afraid of exposing it to the elements. Then I heard clearly, like a stone breaking water, Gelen. Mara, preserve me. That must be Palla. Then you heard of my mother? Asked Bentaniki, turning his way. I hail from Wayrest, practically on the border to Hammerfell. I don't think there's anyone who hasn't heard of your mother and her great heroism, ridding the land of that abominable beast. She died in that struggle, didn't she? Yes, said the girl sadly, but so too did the creature. For a moment we were all silent. I don't remember anything more of that night. Somehow I knew I was invited to dine the next evening, but my mind and heart had been entirely and forevermore arrested by the statue. I returned back to the guild, but my dreams were fevered and brought me no rest. Everything seemed diffused by white light, except for one beautiful, fearsome woman. Palla. Palla. The name burned in my heart. I found myself whispering it in my studies, even when I tried to concentrate on something the magister was saying. My lips would silently purse to voice the pal, and tongue lightly flick to form the la, as if I were kissing her spirit before me. It was madness in every way, except that I knew that it was madness. I knew I was in love. I knew she was a noble Redguard woman, a fierce warrior, more beautiful than the stars. I knew her young daughter Bentaniki had taken possession of a manor house near the guild, and that she liked me, perhaps was even infatuated. I knew Palla had fought a terrible beast and killed it. I knew Palla was dead. As I say, I knew it was madness, and by that I knew I could not be mad. But I also knew that I must return to Bentaniki's place to see her statue of my beloved Palla engage in that final, horrible, fatal battle with the monster. Return I did, over and over again. Had Bentaniki been a different sort of noblewoman, more comfortable with her peers, I would not have had so many opportunities. In her innocence, unaware of my sick obsession, she welcomed my company. We would talk for hours, laughing, and every time we would take a walk to the reflecting pond where I would always stop breathless before the sculpture of her mother. It's a marvelous tradition you have, preserving these figures of your ancestors at their finest moments, I said, feeling her curious eyes on me, and the craftsmanship is without parallel. You wouldn't believe me, laughed the girl, but it was a bit of a scandal when my great-grandfather began the custom. We Redguards hold a great reverence for our families, but we are warriors, not artists. We hired a traveling artist to create the first statues, and everyone admired them until it was revealed that the artist was an elf, an Altmer from the Somerset Isle. Scandal! It was, absolutely, Bentoniki nodded seriously. The idea that a pompous, wicked elf's hands had formed these figures of noble Redguard warriors was unthinkable, profane, irreverent, everything bad you can imagine. But my great-grandfather's heart was in the beauty of it, and his philosophy of using the best to honor the best passed down to us all. I would not have even considered having a lesser artist create the statues of my parents, even if it would have been more elite sculpture. They're all exquisite, I said. But you like the one of my mother most of all, she smiled. I see you look at it, even when you seem to be looking at the others. It's my favorite also. Would you tell me more about her? I asked, trying to keep my voice light and conversational. Oh, she would have said she was nothing extraordinary, but she was, the girl said, picking a flower from the garden. My father died when I was quite young, and she had so many roles to fill, but she did them all effortlessly. We have a great many business interests, and she was brilliant at managing everything. Certainly better than I am now. All it took was her smile, and everyone obeyed, and those that didn't paid dearly. She was very witty and charming, but a formidable force when the need arose for her to fight battles. But I can never remember a moment of feeling neglected or unloved. I literally thought she was too strong for death. Stupid, I know, but when she went to battle that horrible creature, that freak from a mad wizard's laboratory, I never even thought she would not return. She was kind to her friends and ruthless to her enemies. What more can one say about a woman than that? Poor Bentoniki's eyes teared up with remembrance. What sort of villain was I to goad her so in order to satisfy my perverted longings? Sheogorath could never have conflicted a mortal man more than me. I found myself both weeping and filled with desire. Palla not only looked like a goddess, but from her daughter's story, she was one. That night, while undressing for bed, I rediscovered the black disc I had stolen from Magister Tendixis' office weeks before. I had half forgotten about its existence, that mysterious necromantic artifact which the mage believed could resurrect a dead love. Almost by pure instinct, I found myself placing the disc on my heart and whispering, Palla. A momentary chill filled my chamber. My breath hung in the air in a mist before dissipating. Frightened, I dropped the disc. It took a moment before my reason returned, and with it, the inescapable conclusion. The artifact could fulfill my desire. Until the early morning hours, I tried to raise my mistress from the chains of oblivion, but it was no use. I was no necromancer. I entertained thoughts of how to ask one of the magisters to help me, but I remembered how Magister Ilther had bid me to destroy it. They would expel me from the guild if I went to them and destroy the disc themselves, and with it, my only key to bringing my love to me. I was in my usual semi-torpid condition the next day in classes. Magister Ilther himself was lecturing on his specialty, the School of Enchantment. He was a dull speaker with a monotone voice, but suddenly I felt as if every shadow had left the room, and I was in a palace of light. When most persons think of my particular science, they think of the process of invention, the infusing of charms and spells into objects, the creation of a magical blade, perhaps, or a ring. But the skilled enchanter is also a catalyst. The same mind that can create something new can also provoke greater power from something old. A ring that could generate warmth for a novice, on the hand of such a talent, can bake a forest black. The fat man chuckled. Not that I'm advocating that. Leave that for the School of Destruction. That week, all the initiates were asked to choose a field of specialization. All were surprised when I turned my back on my old darling, the School of Illusion. It seemed ridiculous to me that I had ever entertained an affection for such superficial charms. All of my intellect was now focused on the School of Enchantment, the means by which I could free the power of the disc. For months thereafter, I barely slept. A few hours a week I'd spend with Bentoniki in my statue to give myself strength and inspiration. All the rest of my time was spent with Magister Ilther or his assistants, learning everything I could about enchantment. They taught me how to taste the deepest levels of magicka stored within an object. A simple spell cast once, no matter how skillfully and no matter how spectacularly, is ephemeral, of the present, what it is and no more, sighed Magister Ilther. But placed in a home, it develops into an almost living energy, maturing and ripening so only its surface is touched. when an unskilled hand wields it. You must consider yourself a miner, digging deeper to pull forth the very heart of gold. Every night when the laboratory closed, I practiced what I had learned. I could feel my power grow, and with it, the power of the disc. Whispering, Palla, I delved into the artifact, feeling every slight nick that marked the runes and every facet of the gemstones. At times, I was so close to her, I felt hands touching mine. But something dark and bestial, the reality of death, I suppose, would always break across the dawning of my dream. With it came an overwhelming rotting odor, which the initiates in the chambers next to mine began to complain about. Something must have crawled into the floorboards and died, I offered lamely. Magister Ilther praised my scholarship and allowed me the use of his laboratory after hours to further my studies. Yet no matter what I learned, Palla seemed scarcely closer. One night, it all ended. I was swaying in a deep ecstasy, moaning her name, the disc bruising my chest, when a sudden lightning flash through the window broke my concentration. A tempest of furious rain roared over Mount Corrupt. I went to close the shutters, and when I returned to my table, I found that the disc had shattered. I broke into hysterical sobs, and then laughter. I was too much for my fragile mind to bear such a loss after so much time and study. The next day, and the day after, I spent in my bed, burning with a fever. Had I not been at a mage's guild with so many healers, I likely would have died. As it was, I proved an excellent study for the budding young scholars. When I at last was well enough to walk, I went to visit Bentaniki. She was charming as always, never one commenting on my appearance, which must have been ghastly. Finally, I gave her reason to worry when I politely but firmly declined to walk with her along the reflecting pool. "But you love looking at the statuary," she exclaimed. I felt that I owed her the truth, and... Dear lady, I love more than the statuary. I love your mother. She is all I've been able to think about for months now, ever since you and I first removed the tarp from that blessed sculpture. I don't know what you think of me now, but I have been obsessed with learning how to bring her back from the dead. Bentaniki stared at me, eyes wide. Finally, she spoke. "I think you need to leave now. I don't know if this is a terrible jest. Believe me, I wish it were. You see, I failed. I don't know why. It could not have been that my love wasn't strong enough, because no man had a stronger love. Perhaps my skills as an enchanter are not masterful, but it wasn't from a lack of study." I could feel my voice rise, and knew I was beginning to rant. But I could not hold back. Perhaps the fault lay in that your mother never met me. But I think that only the caster's love is taken into account in the necromantic spell. I don't know what it was. Maybe that horrible creature, that monster that killed her, cast some sort of curse on her with his dying breath. I failed. I don't know why. With a surprising burst of speed and strength for so small a lady, Bentaniki shoved herself against me. She screamed, "Get out!" and I fled out the door. Before she slammed the door shut, I offered my pathetic apologies. "I'm so sorry, Bentaniki, but consider that I wanted to bring your mother back to you. It's madness, I know, but there's only one thing that's certain in my life, and that's that I love Palla." The door was nearly shut, but the girl opened it a crack to ask tremulously, "You love whom?" "Palla!" I cried to the gods. "My mother," she whispered angrily, "was named Zarlis. Palla was the monster." I stared at the closed door for Mara knows how much time, and then began the long walk back to the Mages Guild. My memory searched through the minutiae to the tales and tales night, so long ago when I first beheld the statue, and first heard the name of my love. That Brenton initiate Gellin had spoken. He was behind me. Was he recognizing the beast and not the lady? I turned the lonely bend that intersected with the outskirts of Mir Corrupt, and a large shadow rose from the ground where it had been sitting, waiting for me. "Palla," I groaned. "Palla." It howled. And that brings my story up to the present moment. Love is red, like blood.
Huh.
Well, I mean, that'll make the monster lovers happy.
Yeah,
I was
so
like,
that
I don't see how it's a bad ending.
that is a story from inside Elder Scrolls 3, 4, and 5. That is a book you can find in those games.
I was just I was telling Jonas that there while you were reading, it was like, yeah, there's a lot of books in those games. As of Skyrim, there are 337 in-game books.
God.
And just keep on going on. If they ever make a new one instead of infinitely porting Skyrim to everything that can play it, then perhaps we will see even more of them.
Yeah, Legotron mentions the Brian David Gilbert video. Yeah, that's the one that got me to reading. That's the one that got me to reading this one. And what was? So far, I've read the bottom 3 of his top 5 list. I still need to read the top 2.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. You brought something completely different to the table. I like that.
Yeah, it's very different from what we've been doing.
Yeah.
I played Skyrim, but I never had a time to sit down and read all the books, except for the one about the half vampire orc. And I said, "Well, these are pretty deep if you have the time to read all them." But yeah, there's a lot.
Come on, we're in a furry group. You've read Lusty Argonian Maid.
I don't.
I love the BDG video where he covers that. He's like, "Look, I'm not a prude. Like, that could be a good thing, but it's an erotic theater production that goes on for 7 acts. That's not possible to keep up that tension for 7 acts."
Listen. You can keep up sexual tension for a very long time if you are willing to draw these things out shamelessly. I learned that from a little show called Three's Company, and from a little mangaka named Rumiko Takahashi.
All right, I don't know that one.
If you are willing to frustrate your audience to the point of murder, then yes, you can keep this stuff going for an extremely long time.
So is the Lusty Argonian anything like the saucy romance novels in World of Warcraft? I have to know now.
It's like super low level, like erotica, I guess.
Okay. I have to check it out.
So I have like 3 or 4 to choose from at this point, but does anyone else want to go before me?
I'm up for one. All
right, GC, and then I will go after you.
Okay.
Proceed. The floor is yours.
So submit the approval of the Midnight Society, the Village of Halloween. On October 31st in the year 1899, a small village quietly tucked away in the Maryland hillside was found on murder. At the time, unbeknownst to the residents, the events which transpired will follow them like a plague into the next century and beyond, with little chance of being forgotten. It seems rather unsuitable that in light of the gruesome nature of the crime, the anniversary is now enthusiastically celebrated. Time heals all wounds, I suppose. This year marks a special anniversary. Soon it'll be 100 years into the past, 100 years of mystery, speculation, and memorializing. One man holds the burden of responsibility for this, in addition to the killer, that is. John Harrington was a reporter at the Washington Post in the late 1940s when he became interested in murders carried out in the name of the occult. When rumors of a small-town family's suspicious murder reached the Post, John was assigned to investigate. It was in the days following the arrival of Mr. Harrington that an aura was cast upon in the village, born by the blood of an innocent family. The questions he posed to the witnesses and survivors raised questions of their own among the villagers as to the nature of the killings and the evil therein. He quickly wore out his welcome. The villagers rejected his intrusive nature and interest in darker things. However, well-intentioned, Mr. Harrington had been in regard to the investigation reportings. The articles he offered opened a deep wound in the village which could not be closed by prayer alone. Instead, the gate to hell was opened by the curiosity of a single man. There were only 3 witnesses of the crime scene: Sheriff James Anthony, Deputy Sheriff Arthur Grumond, and a farmer who lived behind the house. The investigation wrapped up in 2 days. The case was quickly closed and the record sealed. When asked what happened, the sheriff simply wouldn't talk. His face had changed to wearing the countenance of a shell-shocked soldier. It was only after the village council threatened to remove him from office that he agreed to speak. Sheriff Anthony delivered his remarks and resigned his post effective immediately. The Strathaven family was deceased at the hands of the father and husband. Amongst them were 3 children, the details deemed too brutal for public consumption. The crime was confirmed to be inspired by the occult. It was understood as the act of a man who could not conquer his inner demons, besieged by his traumatic experiences, serving during the Civil War. A tragic of circumstance for the innocent family. The sheriff called it a win for the devil. Shortly after the sheriff's resignation, Mr. Hamilton's article titled "The Devil Celebrates on Halloween" divulged the gruesome details of the villagers. The bodies of Mary Strathaven and her 3 children, Jonah, Elizabeth, and Peter, were found severely burned and resting in curious positions, their left hands covering their eyes and their right hands covering their mouths. A mask was worn over each of their faces, crafted from burlap and having holes where the eyes and mouth reside. The young mother and her 3 children were arranged so that they formed the first 4 lines of a 5-point star. Joseph Strathaven, the last line of the pentagram, lay on top of his family. He also wore a burlap mask, though it contains no holes to see or speak through. Several symbols were burned into the ground which surrounded the departed. Later, Mr. Harrington would reveal that they represented the occult and were intended to summon dark forces, including demons and perhaps the devil himself. While these circumstances were quite disturbing to the villagers upon learning, still there was further details of the crime which elicited the strongest impact. When Joseph's mask was removed, they discovered, carved into his skin across his face, the words Halloween. His mouth was sewn shut, as were his eyes. The words "I'm here" were carved across his chest. Mr. Harrington concluded that the devil was here and he celebrated Halloween. The village was on edge. If, in a once happy and quiet place of peace, they could find no rest. News of the Halloween murders spread beyond the village, and those who sought answers from the beyond were drawn to the village with the hope of bowing before their idols of demons and devils. Rituals were held. Census were performed. Sacrifices were made. A shrine was dedicated at the site, all in the name of Halloween. Before long, the villagers could no longer ignore what was happening. Faith and ideals began to crumble, and the churches emptied and the steeple bells were silenced. Pastor Timothy refused to preach and abandoned his congregation, leading many of them to openly proclaim the death of God himself. A new truth was emerging, capturing the hearts of the people, one by one, its acceptance almost universal. Many began to embrace the regular visitors, their numbers increasing with each successive wave. Shops and restaurants were reopening, and motels increased their capacities. Parties and parades were held, and we ignored the occasions for celebrations like Christmas and Easter in favor of Halloween. Evil became more palatable. No sector of the village was immune. No candidates were elected to the local governor, and they were sympathetic to the revolution for change. Petitions were circulated, and discussions were held. The village council held a vote, and the tally was anonymous. They declared that from this day forward we would no longer be known as the village of Rockburg. We are the village of Halloween. All the better for me, you see. Perhaps I should have told you earlier of my own disposition, so please allow me to digress. Although I'm not to interject myself into the middle of a tragic story, I've inevitably become a part of this village's misfortune. In the years following the death of the Strathaven family, through a somewhat twisted line of kinship, I became the rightful owner of the property. I was satisfied to let this cursed piece of land decay upon itself undisturbed until it rotted into non-existence. However, I felt an incessant desire to preserve its remains from what I determined at the time to be historic value. I began to visit the house regularly, which had deteriorated significantly by the mid-1940s. I spent my days patching holes, fixing windows, cutting down vegetation, and painting walls. I worked through the rain and snow until the restoration was complete. Finally, I arranged the decor to match precisely how it sat on Halloween Day, 1899. I then wrote Mr. Harrington a letter and waited. When he arrived, I invited him inside. He examined the interior with a journalistic fascination, jotting down his details of the small notebook he carried. Most of the questions he posed were innocent in nature, having to do with the history of the house or the craftsmanship of the furniture. We went from room to room until the tour reached the back of the house, where we came upon the only closed door. He politely asked me if he may see inside. I hesitate. At first I denied his request. I explained that I wasn't finished. It needs more work. I'm embarrassed for it to be seen by a reporter taking detailed notes. I'm a proud man, and I need more time to bring it up in the same condition as the rest of the house. Anything to divert his interest. All lies. I know exactly what's behind the door, and it's been meticulously prepared to be as accurate as possible. I've invited him for this very reason. The room, though true to the house, doesn't belong inside its walls. It doesn't belong in this realm. Contrary to what you may believe, I didn't create it. It was always here. I just prepared it for the next one to join, and Mr. Harrison has been chosen. I agree to let him see the room. He grabs the handle, but it won't budge. I reach out and it opens easily. We walk inside and the door closes behind us. Mr. Harrington took a deep breath and surveyed the room. A shrine stood at the back, adorned with a golden pentagram and a crystal goat's head. The faint sound of a breathing beast whispered in our ears. I could see the fear in his face turn slowly to a smile. He tilted his head forward and looked at me from the top of his eyes. "I'm here," he said. "You are," I responded. I opened the door and he walked together to the foyer. I expressed to him my gratitude for his visit and sent him on his way. He knows what to do. In the following weeks, Mr. Harrington would write a series of articles and people would begin to visit the house, which had converted into a museum. As the curator, I led groups through a Halloween murder tour, which started in the foyer and concluded in the yard where the family is buried. I tell the people what they want to hear, how a man lost his mind for the last time, gave his soul away to evil and took his family with him. I spared none of the grotesque details. For nearly 50 years I've led this tour. Not once have we toured the room, the beating heart of this house. The Sentinel Halloween is minutes away, and I'm relieved through apprehensiveness and tired. My time is at hand, and I'm ready for my rest. Before I could sleep, however, there is a matter which must be resolved. He wants out. He wants out, and I can no longer confine him. The walls will not hold any longer, and they breathe with the anticipation of a caged animal. I hear the voices of lost souls calling through the walls, screams of agony and torture, gnashing of teeth. The devil is here and ready to celebrate this Halloween. As midnight strikes and the clock bells toll, flying the door falls silent. Time has come. I approach the door and grip the handle. It's hot. Almost too hot to hold, though I manage to turn it and the door creeps open. I look in and see only darkness. A darkness where light never goes. A trinity of eyes appears in the back of the room, large and red with slits that open horizontally. Steam comes from the nostrils as he breathes with the lungs of an oxen. Blood drips from his teeth as he takes a deep, guttural breath. "Joseph, my lost soul, you are disposed," he growls. As I turn and make my way somberly to the door, I hear hooves stopping rhythmically across the old wood floor as he steps into the hallway behind me. The back door swings open and I turn around, standing as tall as the pillars of hell. He reaches the sky and lets out a primal howl which thrusts me through the doorway. The windows of the house explode. The ground begins to shake. I watch as the house starts to collapse, room by room. It folds into itself. A fire bursts eagerly from the ground beneath and quickly consumes what remains. The whole structure begins to rotate and levitate as it's reduced to the size of a boulder by the progressive foldings. A singularity forms from the spinning mass and takes a familiar order. The 5 points of the golden pentagram is all that remains, burning in fire, hovering above the ground. The earth opens beneath and I can see the dungeon of hell filled to the brim with lost and tortured souls. Human organs line the walls and they ooze with blood and teeth. I feel a strong wind develop and pull me towards the gate of hell. I resist the forces by holding onto a gravestone of concrete protruding from the ground, and the golden pentagram is swallowed by the earth, and hell is satisfied as the gates close and the ground steadies under my feet. My sentence is complete. I slip below the earth and crawl into my coffin, folding my arms across my chest. I close my eyes and sleep. The grave marker above my head tells the world of my shame, while I am an innocent man. Joseph L. Strathaven. Died June 6th, 1842. Was born June 6th, 1842. He passed away on October 31st, 1899. He was murdered.
Well, I don't know what's so unusual about that. That's how I end most of my nights.
Good comment, Stoker.
He was murdered.
He was murdered by a murderer.
That was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. To answer the question, Malachi won in the chat. The story was called, what was it, The Village of Halloween?
Yes.
The Village of Halloween.
That was a good chance to do a demonic voice, but I just couldn't pull it off, huh?
You just don't have enough Satan in you.
Well, the parser can't understand Satan voices anyway.
To be fair, I had to keep it quiet. When I'm demonic, I have to get very deep, and I'm like, you're going to... I didn't do it.
To change the darkest parts of your voice.
I choked.
Down there. Next time, Gadget. Next time.
Sorry.
The hell of you wish to live? It's more like Freddy when I do it. Now that I think...
You forgot the power glove!
You forgot the power glove, Stoker!
I did.
You're on prime time! Every town has an Elm Street!
This is...
So, I've got a couple of real short ones. One of which was requested by Diego. Diego, are you still in the chat? Oh wait, yeah, there he is. He's right. He's one of the most recent comments in the chat, actually. Checking. Diego, are you listening? Because if you are, I'm gonna read the one that you requested.
Telegram for Diego. Is there a Diego in the house?
Is there a Diego in the house? Where in the world is Diego?
Diego.
Well,
Someone forgot the lines, and they're just like, "Where in the world is Diego?"
All right. Well, while I'm waiting on him to, because I want to make sure he hears since he requested it. While I'm waiting on that, I'm going to read a really short one. It's not super well written. Huh?
He is in the chat. He just replied.
Okay. Oh, there he is. Okay, I'm going to read the one you requested, Diego. This one's a pretty simple one. I feel like it may have been read in one of these streams before. It seems it's familiar enough that I feel like it may have been, but it's a popular urban legend, so I may also just be misremembering because I'm so familiar with the various variations of this story. But the title that it's under on the creepypasta.com site is just The Dog's Lick. So, yeah, I'm just going to read it real quick. And I have another really short one after that. And I could go into longer stuff, but we'll see. We'll see how we're doing on time and whether anyone else has stuff they want to get to.
Is a sequel to Smile Dog?
No. But it could have been.
Alright, I'll let you start.
Submitted for the approval of the blah, 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 blah. A young girl is left home alone with only her dog to protect her. When night approaches, she locks all the doors and tries to lock all the windows, but one won't close. She decides to leave it unlocked and goes to bed. Her dog takes its customary place under her bed. In the deep of night, she awakens to a dripping sound coming from the bathroom. The girl is too scared to go check, so she reaches her hand under the bed. She feels a reassuring lick from her dog and falls back to sleep. She reawakens to the dripping sound, reaches her hand down to the dog where she feels the reassuring lick and falls back to sleep. Once more she awakens to the dripping sound, she reaches her hand down and feels the lick of her dog. Now, curious about the dripping sound, she gets up and slowly walks towards the bathroom, the dripping sound getting louder as she approaches. She reaches the bathroom and turns on the light. She is greeted by a horrific sight. Hanging from the shower nozzle is her dog, with its throat slit open and its blood dripping into the bathtub. Something on the bathroom mirror catches her eye, and she turns around. Written on the bathroom mirror in her dog's blood are the words, "Humans can lick too." I don't like this version as much as an older version that I read many years ago in a printed version, but that's not bad.
It ended faster than I thought it would. Okay.
Well, I said it was a short one. This one is one of the first creepypastas I ever read. It's extremely short, and it's not very well written, but I really love the concept in this one. Like, this one strikes just the right note for me, okay? Submitted for the approval of all yous guys. This one is called The Girl in the Photograph. One school day...
Make sure that you mute too, GC.
Oh yeah, I can hear. I heard your mouse wheel.
Oh, I thought we muted.
Nope, sorry. One school day, a boy named Tom was sitting in class and doing math. It was 6 more minutes until after school. As he was doing his homework, something caught his eye. His desk was next to the window, and he turned and looked to the grass outside. It looked like a picture. When school was over, he ran to the spot where he saw it. He ran fast so that no one else could grab it. He picked it up and smiled. It had a picture of the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She had a dress with tights on and red shoes, and her hand was formed into a peace sign. She was so beautiful, he wanted to meet her, so he ran all over the school and asked everyone if they knew her or had ever seen her before. But everyone he asked said no. He was devastated. When he was home, he asked his older sister if she knew the girl, but unfortunately she also said no. It was very late, so Tom walked up the stairs, placed the picture on his bedside table, and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Tom was awakened by a tap on his window. It was like a nail tapping. Well, he got scared. After the tapping, he heard a giggle. He saw a shadow near his window, so he got out of his bed, walked toward his window, opened it up, and followed the giggling. By the time he reached it, it was gone. The next day again, he asked his neighbors if they knew her. Everybody said sorry, no. When his mother came home, he even asked her if she knew her. She said no. He went to his room, placed the picture on his desk, and fell asleep. Once again, he was awakened by a tapping. He took the picture and followed the giggling. He walked across the road when, suddenly, he got hit by a car. He was dead with the picture in his hand. The driver got out of the car and tried to help him, but it was too late. Suddenly, he saw the picture and picked it up. He saw a cute girl holding up 3 fingers. Like I said, it's not crazy good prose, but there's something about the concept I love.
I think I've heard this one before.
Yeah.
Reminds me of something like The Grudge or The Ring.
Yeah, a little bit.
I'm not sure what I can actually put my my finger on, but that's what sort of comes to me at the point.
I can see it. I can see where you're getting with that.
Look at this photograph. Alright, so the others I have queued up will take a little bit longer.
I have a short one.
You have a short one?
I have a short-ish one.
Alright, well, let's have Jonas go, and then probably Rick, and we'll see where we go from there.
Okay.
Alright, muting now.
Alright, submitted for the approval. Actually, I don't need your approval. Whatever. Your face. Okay, this is called The Quiet Sky. It started when we called out to the stars, into the darkness. We felt so small, tumbling through vast emptiness while clinging to the skin of the world. and without a single reason why. We were curious, yes, but ultimately I think we were just terribly frightened. And we were young, so very young. We were children, and like a lonely lost child, we did the only thing we could think of to make it stop. We did what we thought we had to do to make the universe make sense. We called for help. For years, we scanned the sky for a sign. We sent signals to the stars in the darkness beyond. Are we alone? But the skies were quiet, always so quiet, leaving us to our own makings. But crying children never cease, and neither did we. We sent calls into every corner of space for decade after decade. We refused to believe no one was out there. They had to be. Yet for some unknown reason, they never answered us. Everyone remembers when that changed. They think that it responded to the Arecibo message from 1974. The response to the Arecibo message was received almost 3 months ago in 2 separate parts. The first part of the message was received at the Hat Creek Radio Observatory in California. The Allan telescope array picked up what sounded like static interference that continued on for over an hour. It consisted of unintelligible screeching and buzzing sounds that continued without pause for the whole hour. The meaning of this message was never discovered, if it had one. The only thing we knew was that the signal's origin came from somewhere in the Hercules constellation, near Messier 13. As soon as that signal stopped, the real message began. We made contact that day, and we were asked a question. Who is there? It came not through the radios, but as a voice. A voice inside all our heads asked the question. I heard it. My wife heard it. The young heard it, and the old heard it. Even the deaf heard it. Everyone everywhere heard this voice whisper that same question in their heads, in every language on Earth. I remember it almost too clearly. It asked in that familiar yet indescribable voice that's always there in my mind. It was like one of my own thoughts had gone rogue and had decided to speak directly to me. The world seemed to stop as everyone listened for what came next. Where are you? The heavy question seemed to linger in our minds for hours afterwards, and then for days, and then for weeks. That day changed everything. There were the doubters from the very beginning, and the holy ones who claimed that God had spoken to all of us and that the time to repent was now. There were those who claimed they'd heard nothing, and those who claimed that the aliens who had given them their own secret messages. And of course, there were those who truly believed that we had been contacted for the first time by an extraterrestrial race like us, one ready to communicate, ready to lead us out of the dark. We were wrong. We never made contact with alien life, at least nothing comprehensible or discernible to human understanding. The stars are vast, and in their vastness, our voices had touched the ears of something truly incomprehensible, something hungry and malevolent, the voice. We realized our mistakes when the ground started to groan. Beneath our feet, everywhere, the ground started to moan. The muffled sound shook through the dust and dirt below us. No one knew what was causing it, at least not until the calls started coming in. The graveyards were screaming. All at once, the dead had started screaming. Every deceased man, woman, and child was turning in their graves. All the animals did too. Every dog, every cat, everything that had ever walked this earth. The cries of ancient whales shook the seas, and the shrill screeching of birds echoed in the forests. The caskets shook, and the morgues howled. The voices stopped together in an instant, leaving the world in amplified silence. In their absence, a new sound filled the air. The voice returned. I hear you. It came as a whisper from behind, an ominous yet oddly playful presence that felt so close, but was still truly so far away. It let us breathe in the silence for a minute before it made us a promise. It was a promise we all knew to be true. I am coming. The voice was gone, and the air was filled again with screams. This time they were from the living. After the voice had gone, we were left to our own devices. Millions panicked, and rightfully so, as chaos took hold of the streets. Many would die in the violence and the gunfire of that night. They would be known as the Raptured before long, and the rest of us were the condemned. You could only wait. The screaming dead were only the first of the side effects we felt as the voice approached. The closer it got, the more we felt it. That first night after the screaming, we noticed the stars bleed for the first time. A section of the western sky had turned black. Hold on a sec, sorry. Damn it, I lost my place. I'm sorry. A section of the western sky had turned blacker than the night. It was only truly visible because of the ring of stars around it. The light from those stars had turned red, and they seemed to bleed across the sky like food coloring dropped into water. Their light swirled and flowed all along the edge of some unseen mass. I knew then that I was staring into the face of the voice. Our scientists claimed that nothing was there, and that their radar and scans always came up empty. Their telescopes could see nothing but darkness in that section of space. However, the proof was right in front of us as every night that ring of darkness got wider and more stars bled in the sky. We watched it come. As each night passed, the black spot would widen and more stars would distort and bleed around us. During the day, a new hell would greet us. The side effects worsened. The dailies brought something new. I'm sure most of what happened will go untold and unknown. The animals started disappearing. All of them. No tracks, no traces, or bodies were left behind. Pets would run away, some violently so. They all retreated, never to be seen again. The forests were left abandoned, the oceans empty, the air was left silent. The world just seemed silent, empty, and lonely. They left like water receding from the shore, just before the tsunami breaks. One day, about 2 weeks ago, scientists tried to talk to the voice again. They hoped perhaps to reason with it. They told it about what was happening in our world and asked it questions. The scientists begged, it didn't speak. When asked what the voice sent a response. The next night the skies lit up with streaks of fire. It was alight for hours, blazing with orange and red. We didn't realize the effects until the next day when the televisions turned to static and their telephones refused to work. We had sat, watching, as all the satellites were knocked out of the heavens. After that report became rumors and rumblings, sanity a thing of the past. The air chilled and weighed us down. The voice was nearly here, and everyone felt it. It rained for a week after the satellites fell. The rain was salty and marred with an unknown filth that turned the grass black. Maybe the satellites tracked something back in with them when they hit the sky. No one knew for sure. All we know is that it fell from clouds black as charcoal that blotted out the sun, like liquid ash. Darkness fell upon us for hours, for days. When the clouds went away, the skies were empty. There were no clouds, yet the sky hung low and gray. If the sun was anywhere in the sky, it never made itself known. Even if it had abandoned us. Each day grew darker and darker until night and day became almost the same. Some people would later claim that they'd seen things in the dark, creatures with gangly limbs and crooked faces, lurking in the corner of their vision. There were tall white creatures that became molted or rotten through their transparent skin. Appearances would last for just a second or two before vanishing without a trace. Some believed this was the first step in the invasion. But the rest of us didn't know what to think. We just knew that it was nothing that simple or benign. They must have been hallucinations, just more madness to endure. But ultimately as harmless as anything else. As harmless as the screams of the dead, the missing animals, and the dying sky. Appearances slowly increased in duration and number. I think everyone saw them once at the least, but I don't think a single person would ever guess why they were truly here. They never touched nor spoke to anyone, and they certainly never harmed anyone. Most who got good looks at them described them as mournful or sorrowful looking. Some even claimed the creatures watched over them at night, and others even claimed that it seemed as if the creatures were sorry for them. One claimed to have even seen one prostrate upon the ground, hands clasped above its head, as if it was praying for us. Prayer was no help. The churches and places of worship that had divided us for so long failed to bring any hope to anyone in the end. The voice let them pray and beg for a while, but just days ago the voice ended it all. No one questioned how, for at that point nothing that happened surprised anyone anymore. But on the final day all books of worship burned. Every last Bible, every Koran, everything. People rushed to their centers of faith but found no solace. The churches and temples had suffered the same fates, if not worse. The people were left abandoned by their greatest hopes. There were rumors of churches all over the world with walls formed from the bodies of those who had sought refuge. They were merged to the walls, stuck to them like flies in a trap. They died, still pleading for hope, and they were beyond God's help. The rest of us had to learn to stop begging. We waited. The final message came. From beyond the sky, it fell upon us. The voice echoed, and it spoke the simple truth. I am here. There is a darkness beyond the horizon, the likes of which I doubt has ever been seen. It brings with it the screams of countless souls, and it moves fast. The stars are dying now, and I know they'll never be seen again. The light is dying so fast. I leave this not as a warning. No, it's far, far too late for that. Instead, consider this the last realization, the last humanity will ever know. For we used to wonder whether or not we were alone and lost, but never whether or not we were safe and hidden. The universe is infinite, and our understanding was significantly more finite. We should never have beckoned to the darkness. Instead, we should have clung to the light and closed our eyes every time we returned to the void. As the final minutes approach, I hold one final truth to be certain. I know now why the skies were always so quiet.
Honestly, that just feels like a 2020 news story.
Saving times, I just noticed. Well, it's not happy for you guys yet, but yeah, just have it here.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because you're 2 hours ahead of us, so happy return to standard time, Game Cobra.
Thank you.
The real time, quote unquote, has reasserted itself.
The real time, which
Non-butterfly.
lasts significantly less than fake time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alright, Rick, you wanted to do another one, I believe?
Yes.
Alright, then I shall cede the floor to you.
Okay. The Nice Guy by Wellhay Productions. Frank, Thomas, and Kirby enter the office break room at approximately 12:25 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Each man has various containers designed for holding food and drink, and as they lazily slump into the fiberglass chairs that were haphazardly pushed under the table after their previous uses, the room echoes of violent flop pops and elongated scrawl jips as Tupperware lids fly open and velcroed bags release their treasures. God damn it! Thomas rolls his eyes. Frank, with a mouthful of cold pizza, mumbles in empathy. Wife pack you tuna salad again, huh? Thomas tosses the soggy sandwich down onto the table with a resounding glop. She knows I hate this stuff. I swear, I almost reached my breaking point with this shit. Why don't you just pack your own lunch? Kirby attempts to speak through his teeth caked with salad. A drip of ranch dressing falls from Kirby's lip and collides with the table. Thomas just glares at Kirby in disdain. You don't get it, man. I've told her like 50 times. I don't like tuna salad, but does she listen? No. Thomas raises his right hand to his forehead. I swear, I'm up to here with this. Well, at least you're not like that one guy. Frank wipes his mouth with the residual pepperoni grease of a cheap paper napkin. What one guy? Thomas looks at Frank in slight confusion. You talking about that guy from CompuTools? I heard about it on the news last week, Kirby chimes in. He already has begun digging into his pudding cup. Thomas spins around to Kirby. What the hell are you guys talking about? Frank wipes off his hands with another napkin, folds his hands in front of him, and leans in quietly. Thomas and Kirby follow suit. See, there was this guy over at CompuTools. Nice guy, I hear. What was his name? Frank concentrates on the ceiling, searching for a name. Suddenly he snaps his fingers. Phil Curbson. Anyway, he was one of those diligent workers, never complained, always got his work done before the deadline. Hell, he would even stay late to make sure that his perfect record was never tarnished. Thomas chimes in. Ugh, I hate those guys. Well, supposedly, CompuTools hired this new hotshot manager, basically ROTC'd up from corporate, never lifted a finger in his life and got to skip right to the front. Thomas shakes his head in disgust. Exactly. So this guy was brought in to, Frank raises his fingers to make quotations, help And since this douche really didn't know anything about CompuTool's product, he would just bark orders and micromanage everyone. Everyone in the office was buzzing. We're going to quit. Let's get HR involved. This guy is completely heartless. The usual empty water cooler promises. Everyone was in a tiff except Phil. Phil would mind his own business and do his work with a silent smile. He would even go so far as asking this new manager, anything I can do to help? Well, I don't know if that manager deliberately planned to be this malicious or if it was just a common nature for him, but he got this notion in his head to see how far he could bend Phil until he broke. Starting the very next day, the manager threw the biggest workflow onto Phil's desk and barked out, I need this done by 5 o'clock today or you can just pack your shit now, or something to that effect. Phil quietly turned to face the manager, smiled his calm, innocent smile, and said, Sure thing, boss. 5 o'clock rolls around, and Phil walks into the manager's office and proudly places the completed report onto the man's desk. Here you go, boss. The manager looked up from polishing and buffing his prized 600-pound marble desk to the completed pile of papers with a look of complete shock. How could one man complete that report in only 7.5 short hours? His eyes then shifted from the report to glare viciously at Phil's calm, lucid face. Anything else I can do to help? Smiled Phil. The manager simply shook his head in disbelief. Okay. Well, I'm going to head out for the day, sir. You have yourself a great evening. The manager was flabbergasted. He steeled his motives and vowed that he would try harder to break this man's spirit by the end of the week. Well, the end of the week came and went, and still Phil was as cheerful as ever, always responding to every outrageous task with a happy, sure thing, and then turning in the completed work to the manager at the end of the day with a pleasant, anything else I can do to help? Well, this went on for a few weeks, and the manager, now seeing that the current efforts were fruitless, decided maybe he needed to up the ante. The manager would now bombard Phil with major accounts and lengthy business trips and tedious conferences, all to quell his passion that Phil must be broken. But with every new and more difficult task, Phil would embrace it with a sure thing, boss, and come back with a more sunny, anything else I can do to help? The manager, now at his wit's end, had one more trick up his sleeve. Although his lack of concentration on the job he was hired for was beginning to come under fire, he wanted to give it one more shot before he himself had to face the firing squad. He got in his head that it was the breaks in between each 8-hour day that were allowing Phil to wind down, regain his bearings, and get a good night's sleep, and come back the next day ready for more. So, with that in mind, he gave Phil the budget report for the following year and told him, I don't care how long it takes, but you cannot leave your desk until we trim at least $5 million off next year's budget. As always, Phil replied with his trademark, sure thing, boss. The manager turned away, knowing that this task would be Phil's breaking point. And, like clockwork, Phil came into the manager's office with the completed budget and handed it to him. Anything else I can do to help? The manager looked over the budget and said, I really don't like these numbers. The manager threw the report back at Phil. Do it all over, and this time, do it right. Phil's smile sagged a little, but he soon rebounded and turned around and headed back to his desk. The manager saw Phil's smile buckle for just a moment, and he chuckled to himself that his plan was finally working. 8 o'clock rolled around, and Phil returned back to the manager's office, but Phil looked a bit different. His hair was a bit disheveled. His horn-rimmed glasses were now on his forehead. One corner of his shirt had become untucked from his pants. Phil's stride wasn't as carefree. Phil handed the report to the manager and exasperatedly uttered, Anything else I could do to help, sir? The manager, now seeing victory close at hand, looked at the report. Phil, I think you made some miscalculations here. He gave the report back to Phil and said, Do it again, and remember what I said. You stay until it's complete. Phil, dejected, defeated, disappointed, looked at the report in his hands, wiped the sweat from his brow, and scratched the back of his neck. The nearly broken man headed back to his desk to correct his errors. As soon as Phil left his office, the manager closed the door and danced a twisted victory dance. Phil was nearly gone. The manager was going to sleep good that night. At 11 o'clock, Phil trudged back into the manager's office and handed him the completed corrected report. Exhausted, Phil asked, Is there anything else I can do to help, sir? The manager, now a shining example of pure arrogance, threw the report on the floor and exclaimed, Why did you do the budget for next year? I asked you to do the budget for this year. Can't you even follow simple instructions? I want you to march back to your pathetic little cube, and you're going to stay all night if you have to, until you do exactly what I ask you to do, or so help me God, I will find someone else who can do it. Now, no one knows exactly what happened next, but some of the late-night stragglers who heard the manager's tirade claimed as soon as he was finished, Phil took off his glasses, cleaned them with the corner of his shirt that was still untucked, put his glasses back on, and closed all the blinds in the manager's office. What came from the room next was a thunderous crash and a high-pitched shriek. The door flew open and the manager bolted out of the room with glass shards in his hair, bleeding profusely from his face, screaming, "Call security! Call security!" Witnesses then claimed that they saw Phil calmly walk out of the office, blood spattered about his shirt and hands. He held a letter opener in his right hand, now stained with blood. Phil's calm and happy expression was lost to a visage one person could only describe as berserk. Phil's brow furrowed, scrunching his eyebrows into wide arches. His teeth gnashed and, according to one person, appeared sharp and pointed. His skin, once pale and fair, was now red and scaly. His slick hair now flailed about wildly about his head and danced of its own accord. Phil marched toward the cowering manager. "Sure thing! Sure thing! Sure thing!" Phil continued to chant these two words over and over, and the volume of his voice continued to climb until he was shrieking. Phil destroyed everything in his path to get to the manager, who was now scrambling for the elevator. He turned over cubicle walls, hurled the office printer, and overturned desks, but was still marching at a steady pace. Not once did Phil's gait increase in speed. The elevator doors finally opened, and the manager quickly darted inside. As he was frantically pounding on the door close button, Phil's arm thrust inside the cabin as the doors began to shut. The manager let out a girlish cry for help, and then... Thomas, now sitting on the edge of his seat, blinks. "Yeah? Well," Frank continues, as security hauled him away. The folks that stuck around for the whole ordeal say that they never heard Phil use any profanity ever, but on that day they heard curse words so vile that they almost sounded like they were in some form of ancient tongue, some demonic language. Only by the grace of God was security able to restrain Phil, and as a paddy wagon rolled up to the office building drive, witnesses noticed three things. First, that Phil was kicking and screaming the entire time and was hardly recognizable. Second, that the manager couldn't stop crying, and third, the most bizarre, was that they realized what made the thunderous crash in the manager's office. The 600-pound marble desk, the manager's prized possession, now lay in pieces outside the office window. "So that's it? What happened after that?" "Had to have been a trial," Thomas exclaims. "Oh, Phil was deemed too mentally unstable to stand trial, so he was committed to the state hospital over in Brookfield. And everything died down and returned to normal. A manager was brought in to see corporate, and he was actually let go, because not only did security cameras record what Phil did to the manager in the office, but they also recorded the manager's outburst that on Phil that caused him to snap in the first place. "Just desserts, I say," Thomas comments. Kirby just shakes his head as he starts to clean up his empty containers. "Well, here's a real punchline, and I got this from Sally Boyd over there at CompuTools. She used to be the manager's admin. After the manager was let go, he was cleaning out his temporary desk, and to pass time, he had the radio on. The manager left his office for a moment to get some more boxes. As he returned back to his office, she heard the radio announce, Phil Curbson, committed to Brookfield State Hospital on Monday, was discovered missing from his cell earlier today. The manager froze in horror, and Sally turned around to see the manager's expression. The door violently slammed in her face, knocking her backwards onto the ground. As she recovered from her fall, she told me that she could clearly hear the manager pleading for his life. She distinctly heard, 'Please, don't, I'll do anything you want.' And then a familiar, calm, and soothing voice came from behind the door. 'Anything I can do to help?' Sally pounced for the door, but it was locked. She tried to look through the window, but the blinds were mostly drawn, so she could only see the flailing arms and legs. Sally kicked at the door repeatedly and shouted, 'Somebody, please help!' But it was too late. As soon as a commotion ceased from the inside the office, Sally heard the knob click, which signaled that it had been unlocked. With tears in her eyes, she slowly reached for the knob and opened the door to reveal a gruesome scene. The manager was splayed open from his throat to his pelvis, rib cage and organs exposed. His hands were twisted into contorted knots of flesh and knuckle. His face was warped into an expression of unrelenting anguish and fear, eyes wide, jaw locked, nose broken and twisted. In his left hand, its last cadence drawing to a close, was the manager's own heart. Sally and some of the onlookers who had finally gained access to the room then looked up to see the following message scrawled on the bare, dingily yellow office wall. "We were wrong. He had a heart after all." Jesus! Thomas had to hold back the vomit by covering his mouth. After that, CompuTool shut down that office. I think they turned it into a megabuy. Frank finishes his tale with a solemn sip of coffee. Thomas rubs his eyes. "Whoa, wait a minute. Whatever happened to Phil?" This is where I'm supposed to say that that's the strange thing, but it's not really that strange. When they finally opened up the office, the only person in there was the manager. Sally even said she never actually saw Phil. She only heard his voice, or at least what sounded like his voice, and he hasn't been seen since. "That story's complete bullshit," Kirby exclaims. Frank and Thomas spin around to glare at Kirby for breaking the mood. What? Thomas inquires. Like you know exactly what happened. I just know that's not how it happened, Kirby calmly states as he adjusts his horn-rimmed glasses. Okay, hotshot, how do you know? Frank jests. Because... Kirby leans in close. Frank and Thomas match Kirby's movement. The hospital doesn't know I'm gone yet. Just then, Kirby's manager leans into the break room. Hey, Kirb, I need you to do something for me. Sure thing, boss. As Kirby stands up to leave the now-still break room, Frank and Thomas glance up at his security badge and see his full name, Kirby Phillips.
I mean, I don't know. I felt like it was justified.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been there. You know, we all had that job. You know.
What an answer to relay when someone asks you, what guy?
Sure it wasn't a girl?
Maybe it was phone!
Maybe it was you,
And you forgot that this ever happened.
and you were dead.
I'm bringing you in, mister.
Alright. How much later do we want to go with this? It's already 12:21. Do we want to go to the usual time, or do we want to go a tiny bit longer because Halloween?
Well, it is Halloween.
It's Halloween.
It is Halloween.
I was going to read a classic creepypasta called The Rake, but I don't know. I'm looking over it. I don't feel like it's that interesting a story to read. I could do the SCP that Legotron wants me to do, which is kind of a funny one. I actually looked over it. It is an interesting one. Or I could also go back to Poe and also to one of the internet's favorite memes and go for the Cask of Amontillado. Does anyone have any preferences for what I do? Vote now on your phones.
Shrug.
Legotron says you know what my vote is for.
Yes, I do know what your vote is for, Legotron. Anyone else in the chat, speak now or forever hold your bees. A lot of bees
Brony
being
Vamp
held.
is a Poe fan.
Oh. Brony Vamp is a pony fan.
That was
Stoker, would you mind if I took the SCP page and then you read Cask?
You know what? Sure. Let's do that.
there you
Let's
go.
do it that way. I will link you to the SCP right in the chat, or in the Discord in case you don't have access to it. And I can do Poe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just as planned. My climbing move. None of you know what I'm talking about. Okay.
No clue.
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I can go and then you can go.
Sounds good to me.
Alright. For the approval of the board of the Midnight Society, with all pursuant checks and things applied, SCP number 4006. Object class.
Your mic.
Object class Thaumiel. Special containment procedures. No concrete containment procedures are necessary. Actions taken in regards to SCP-4006 should follow standard protocol of maintaining the Veil. Protocol MTV-4006. Description: SCP-4006 is a probabilistic anomaly affecting the state of Massachusetts, United States of America. SCP-4006 works to perpetuate the idea that Massachusetts is a populated state, with a government, infrastructure, economy, various population centers, etc. Due to this, the true nature of Massachusetts is entirely unknown to the public. Massachusetts has no history of human occupation. All effects of SCP-4006 are in and of themselves mundane events, though highly improbable. It is the pervasiveness and frequency of these nigh incalculably low probability events and their collaboration to effectively spread misinformation about Massachusetts that earns the SCP anomalous recognition. Why several SCP Foundation researchers were immune to the effects of the SCP and were able to discover it, and subsequently spread the information to others, is unclear. To better understand the SCP's effects, the following is a heavily abridged early history of Massachusetts. Massachusetts lacks any tribal presence. Several nations, including Britain, Portugal, Spain, and France, began to colonize the New World and the Americas. Britain, knowing of France's plans to claim the northernmost parts of North America, claims to have a colony further north than Jamestown, and names the faux colony Plymouth. Due to poor communication, further colonists are led to believe that the land of Massachusetts has already been colonized. Colonists that do wish to go to Plymouth inexplicably find themselves landing further south after terrible ocean storms. Such colonists are met with other colonists who believe themselves to be further north, and call the area Massachusetts. The fishing industry operates out of Rhode Island. Though fishing boats are pushed north by southern winds to the coast of Massachusetts, no boats ever land on the beaches, and no human steps foot onto any land in Massachusetts. Rhode Island and Connecticut develop, unknowing of the presence of people believing to be within Massachusetts. Colonies use the same land and harvest from the same forests, but never come into direct contact with one another. Colonists believing to be from Massachusetts, hereafter referred to as SCP-4006-A, and colonists from Connecticut and Rhode Island finally meet, but never explicitly discuss their location. SCP-4006-A assume the others they meet to also believe themselves to be from Massachusetts. Cities establish two or more separate governments and assume separate names. People believing themselves to be from one city or the other only meet with police forces and only read the news pertaining to the city identity they believe to be true. The governments of each city never become aware of each other's existence and continue to function independently. The same pattern is established as the colonies of Rhode Island and Connecticut establish governments, while SCP-4006-A believe these governments to be their own governments. English surveillance of each colony is tricked in much the same way, incorrectly assuming that they have crossed the border into Massachusetts, and only then encountering SCP-4006-A when discussing regional affairs. It is difficult to assess the history of Massachusetts past this, due to the SCP-4006's effects. By 1928, the SCP-A spanned the entire East Coast and several northeastern states. Concentrations were, and are still, highest in Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, and New Jersey. The furthest west that SCP-4006-A has been identified is North Dakota. People believing themselves to be visiting any city in Massachusetts, such as Boston, will actually be in any number of other cities near Massachusetts. Such cities include New York City, Philadelphia, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh. Whenever in a conversation where the name of, trivia about, or landmarks within the city are discussed, people will only encounter others who believe themselves to be in that same city. Note that due to the scale of SCP-4006, only enough effects to communicate the nature of the SCP have been recorded here. For a list of all recorded effects of the SCP, contact any personnel of 4/4006 clearance. Addendum 4006-1 Foundation Occupation of Massachusetts. SCP-4006's effects make Massachusetts an unusually secure location for Foundation activities. However, while SCP-4006 is currently the most powerful probability-based anomaly within the Foundation's knowledge, purview, and containment, it has been shown to be imperfect, as several Foundation scientists were able to discover the true nature of Massachusetts while researching anomalies they believe to be within Massachusetts. As such, Protocol MTV-4006 has been created. This protocol is a reminder to all involved with SCP-4006 and those working in sites within Massachusetts. Do not assume that SCP-4006 will keep activity secret. Continue to take all necessary precautions to maintain the veil. In the event that SCP-4006 fails to censor all information about the true nature of Massachusetts. In the name of MTV-4006, the SCP Foundation has allocated several million USD a year towards creating further defenses against the public discovery of the true nature of Massachusetts. Such precautions have included setting up sites at the locations of several supposed cities, Boston, Springfield, etc., and making the sites appear to satellites like normal buildings. Having roads between sites mimic the publicly agreed upon road maps of Massachusetts. For example, the sites between Springfield and Boston use a connecting road that is technically a continuation of Highway 90. Wearing mostly civilian-style clothing while wandering outside of sites. At the time of writing, all precautions have been wholly unnecessary as SCP-4006 continues to function as expected. This fact has not diminished the Foundation's dedication to Protocol MTV-4006. Addendum 4006-1 Extension Continued Foundation Occupation of Massachusetts. Sites within Massachusetts have expanded to be the 5 largest Foundation sites. Site 19's function as the largest collection of Foundation Level 5 personnel, site surveyors, HMCL supervisors, and etc., as well as the home of the Ethics Committee Board, have now been transferred to Site 4006, based at the supposed location of Boston. Many difficult to contain SCP objects, or objects that take up a significant amount of space to contain, have since been moved en masse to Massachusetts. Hundreds of Foundation researchers, staff, and miscellaneous personnel have migrated to Massachusetts in consequence. In light of this, several developments have been made in the name of Protocol MTV-4006, including an airport has been created by Site 4006, in mimicry of the supposed Logan International Airport, where private Foundation airplanes, disguised as commercial flights, may make easier commute to and from Massachusetts. Plans to create airports in several other locations in Massachusetts have been drafted. Infrastructure, mimicking real cities, has been implemented to create easy living for those within Massachusetts. All businesses have been placed in locations mimicking online maps for the site of the cities. A more complex roadway system across Massachusetts to make for easier commute between sites and testing locations. In response to these developments, Project 4006-109, Full Realization of Massachusetts, has been proposed in hopes of creating a functioning state within the United States in which the Foundation alone may operate and accommodate for thousands of personnel. Official implementation of Project 4006-109 would begin in 2 years if approved. Addendum 4006-2 Completion of Project 4006-109 and expanding awareness of SCP-4006. Project 4006-109 has been completed, and the state of Massachusetts recreated from common public misunderstandings of its structure. All major cities and small towns have been created, infrastructure mimic, housing populated with SCP Foundation personnel, and all major public roads created. The U.S. government has begun to treat the physical location of Massachusetts and its Foundation personnel as true citizens of Massachusetts. SCP Foundation personnel in the U.S. government have implemented a system by which only fellow Foundation personnel within the government ever preside over Massachusetts. This way, the true nature of Massachusetts continues to remain a secret, while also allowing the SCP Foundation's recreation of Massachusetts to function as a real state within the United States. Commercial flights have now been seen flying over Massachusetts, and several civilian cars have passed through Massachusetts at various times. In light of this, classified Foundation activities have been further suppressed, and Protocol MTV-4006 has taken even higher precedence. Testing areas above ground have been officially closed off to the public to make certain that civilians passing through do not stumble upon classified materials. Several addenda have been removed due to redundancy and repetition. To view a list of removed addenda, contacting any researcher of 4-4006. Addendum 4006-8 Uncertainty regarding SCP-4006. In 2023, It has been found that fewer than 20 people believing themselves to be in Massachusetts exist outside of the state of Massachusetts, and that those that do are not under the effects of a probabilistic anomaly such as SCP-4006. Massachusetts is now more populated by normal U.S. citizens than Foundation personnel. While Massachusetts remains the largest collection of SCP Foundation assets, all sites, testing grounds, outposts, and otherwise are hidden and contained. In light of this, 3 motions have been proposed. Reclassify SCP-4006 as neutralized. Reclassify SCP-4006 as explained. Keep SCP-4006 as Thaumiel. The first motion argues that SCP-4006 no longer quantifiably exists. The second motion argues that while SCP-4006 was a large enough phenomenon to warrant the designation of an SCP object at the time, every individual piece of SCP-4006 was able to be explained by coincidence and science. The third motion has been put forth by the O5 Council.
Well, that explains why I've never been to Massachusetts.
Oh, hold on. Ligatron said read the last part.
Oh, there is a tiny bit left. Yes, just a couple of paragraphs.
Okay. Passcode accepted. Revised SCP-4006 file accessed. Item number SCP-4006. Object class Thaumiel. Special containment procedures non-applicable. Description: SCP-4006's existence is in and of itself theoretical. Proof of SCP-4006's existence or non-existence has not been concretely gathered, but due to SCP-4006's likelihood to exist and its position as the most powerful probabilistic anomaly in existence, if it were to exist, it has been recorded as an SCP object. Evidence for SCP-4006's existence includes the public's ignorance of the true nature of Massachusetts, the public's ignorance of the true nature of the universe, the containment of over 3,000 SCP objects with breaches in secrecy being only temporary, the existence of SCP-2000 and other Thaumiel SCP objects, the existence of SCP-3000 and the discovery of amnestic compounds in general at convenient times in the Foundation's history. Earth dimensions being particularly disconnected and difficult to access from the rest of the multiverse. The non-existence of any powerful groups whose goals include the complete destruction of normalcy. The existence of several powerful groups whose goals include the maintenance of normalcy. The existence of the SCP Foundation. However, due to SCP-4006 only potentially existing, and evidence suggesting that if it does exist, that the SCP Foundation in part perpetuates it, it is best to assume that SCP-4006 does not exist. Allowing the theory of SCP-4006's existence to perpetuate may instill a sense of apathy and meaninglessness, leading towards SCP Foundation personnel taking far greater risks than are necessary while holding the belief that SCP-4006 will cover any mistakes of theirs. SCP-4006 is the phenomenon known as the Veil.
And again, I say, explains why I have never been to Massachusetts. Alright.
Huh.
SC. Also, I gotta say, there comes a point at which the sounds SCP-4006, they get repeated so much that they kind of stop sounding like sounds for a while.
That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to make sure I didn't say just like the SCP or SCP-4006. I'm like, no, if I repeat it the same way every time, it's gonna sound weird. It's gonna start sounding weird, and that's the point.
It felt like it honestly felt like someone trying to hypnotize me at that point.
That's how they get you.
Maybe that's part of it.
That's what I was trying to go for.
Well, you succeeded admirably. Alright. I believe this is going to be the last one that I read for the night, because this'll take me a little bit longer. So, without further ado, we're going to do the internet's favorite Edgar Allan Poe meme and mine. Because, you know, there are so many Edgar Allan Poe memes to choose from, am I right? The Cask of Amontillado. Published originally in 1846. Read by yours truly, Stoker Bramwell, and submitted for the approval of all you lovely listeners out there in TV land. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You who so well know the nature of my soul will not suppose, however, that gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and balls. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible! And in the middle of the carnival!" "I have my doubts," I replied, and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in that matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain. "Amontillado? I have my doubts. Amontillado! And I must satisfy them. Amontillado! As you're engaged, I'm on my way to Lucrezi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me, Lucrezi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry. And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go. Whither? To your vaults. My friend, no. I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucrezi? I have no engagement. Come. My friend, no, it is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with niter. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado! You have been imposed upon. And as for Lucrezi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado. Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, and putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return into the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I knew well, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe," he said. "It is farther on," said I, "but observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. "Neither?" he asked at length. "Neither," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said with decision. "We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucrece." "Enough," he said. "The cough's a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough." "True, true," I replied. "And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper precaution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps." Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold. "Drink," I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly while his bells jingled. "I drink," he said, "to the buried that repose around us." "And I to your long life." He again took my arm, and we proceeded. "These vaults," he said, "are extensive." "The Montresors," I replied, "were a great and numerous family." "I forget your arms." "A human foot d'or, in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant, whose fangs are embedded in the heel." "And the motto?" "Nemo me impune lacessit." "Good," he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. We passed through long walls of piled skeletons with casks and puncheons intermingling into the most inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. "The nitre," I said. "See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough!" "It is nothing," he said. "Let us go on. But first another draught of that Medoc." I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. "You do not comprehend?" he said. "Not I," I replied. "Then you are not of the Brotherhood." "How?" "You are not of the Masons." "Yes, yes," I said. "Yes, yes." "You? Impossible! A Mason?" "A Mason," I replied. "A sign," he said. "A sign!" "It is this," I answered, producing from beneath the folds of my roquelaire a trowel. "You jest!" he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. "But let us proceed to the Amontillado." "Be it so," I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again, arrived at a deep crypt, in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeaux rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th side, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall, thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior crypt or recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination, the feeble light, did not enable us to see. "Proceed," I said. "Herein is the Amontillado." "As for Lucrezi, he is an ignoramus," interrupted my friend as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was much too astonished to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, "over the wall. You cannot help feeling the niter. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return." "No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attention in my power." The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied, "the Amontillado." As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I'd scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the 2nd tier, and the 3rd, and the 4th, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel, and finished without interruption the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. Again I paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated, I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position, but now there came out from the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs on my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, A very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the Palazzo. over wine. The Amontillado, I said. Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will they not be awaiting us at the Palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone. Yes, I said. Let us be gone. For the love of God, Montressor! Yes, I said. For the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, Fortunato! No answer. I called again, Fortunato! No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in reply only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat. I love that story is just basically just one guy being like, yes, I did in fact completely get away with a horrible murder. Also, yes, that coughing actually did do a little bit of a number on me.
Pretty real. Were we supposed to feel sorry for Fortunato? Because I kind of did.
I mean, this is the thing, right? This is the thing about the story. The narrator, Montressor, never tells us what it was that Fortunato did to earn this fate in his eyes. So, if you want to feel sorry for him, I feel that's a completely valid approach to take, because we have no idea what he was supposed to have done to earn this. And yes, this was a meme for a while, especially on Tumblr. There were, and Twitter to an extent, there were so many jokes going around about the Cask of Amontillado. It was one of my favorite memes that has ever existed. There was like one of my, they all followed this format where someone would say something and that someone would be like, oh, I have a whole bunch of that stuff if you'll follow me into the basement. And the OP would be like, okay, sure. Oh, man.
Good story. I usually find it scary or the other way around, but yeah, it was a pretty good story.
You have to read that story with a sense of humor. The narrator is clearly extremely proud of everything he does.
There's a couple post stories that you have to read like that.
Yeah. My favorite bit in it is where Fortunato asks him if he's a mason, and he's like, oh, of course I'm a mason, see? And he literally pulls out the trowel he's gonna use to wall him up, and is like, see, look, I'm a mason!
Yep.
Oh,
Telltale Heart is also
man.
a little bit like
19th century humor, my guys.
yeah, we're here for the the Cask of Amontillado is literally the dankest meme. Alright, I don't think I can do another one after that. Does anyone else have anything else they want to finish us out with, or are we done for the night?
I'm done.
Find one more, but at the moment I can't find one.
Well, it's getting super late for you, isn't it? I was about to say it's 3 a.m. for you, but then I realized it's actually 2 a.m. for you because of the magic of make-believe time.
Yep.
That's correct.
Magic of butterfly time.
Butterflies in the sky. Oh, man, that coughing fit.
You were acting, or that was real?
It was a little bit of both. I actually made myself a little lightheaded doing that.
Whoa, Stokes!
Listen, you want it done right?
He's gone method, folks. He's gone full method acting.
Never go full method.
Yeah, never go full method.
Right. Rick, you got one? Maybe? No?
I think we've...
Well, hang on, Rick's the host. Let him, you know.
Rick owns the house. He gets the hall.
Yeah.
This is Rick's house. The house of Griffin. The house of Gryffindor. There was a parody of this when the guy making the wall actually trapped himself instead. I could see that. There's a one of the Roger Corman Edgar Allan Poe movies from the 50s and 60s. 9 out of 10 of which starred Vincent Price.
Of course.
Where they did an anthology picture where they did 3 different Poe stories, and they also got Peter Lorre and Basil Rathbone in on this. Which, if you know old actors, you're like, ooh, and if you don't, you'll be like, who? But they actually managed to combine the Cask of Amontillado and the Black Cat into one story.
Nice.
Which actually kind of worked for it. I mean, there is enough similarity in the 2 stories that you can pull it off. But
oh my God, it's the Edgar Allan Poe shared universe.
The Edgar Allan Poe shared universe. Yeah, Peter Lorre plays the Montresor character who's doing the walling up, and Vincent Price is the Fortunato character who is being walled up.
I want to check that out.
Yeah, it's fun.
I found one more. It's a very short one, 2 minutes. If
I got 10 minutes.
Go to it.
All right, GC, you'll give it the closing end to the night for the midnight approval of the Midnight Society. We will call this one White with Red. A man went to a hotel.
This one?
I'm sorry, I was about to say I didn't want to jump in, but yes, Jonas actually read this one the first night we did these creepypastas.
Oh,
I'm sorry, GC. I mean, do you want to do it again?
nah. If it's already been read, I was saying that too. I was going to ask you first, but I said I swear we read this one.
Yeah, Jonas did it. I'm sorry.
Oh well, I guess that's it then.
Simpsons did it.
Simpsons did it.
Well, Rick, thanks so much for hosting. This was a lot of fun. Audience, thank you so much for sticking it out. And yeah, it's great. All you guys did a great job.
Yeah, it was definitely fun. I think we should do this again every now and then, even though Halloween is technically over for those of you who don't celebrate it year-round.
Well, Stoker, it can't be 24/7 Halloween like you.
I remember seeing this post that's like, Halloween's for tourists, I live it all year long.
Well, let's just wait for Christmas Halloween, or the Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah, Nightmare Before Christmas. Could look up specifically spooky Christmas stories, that'd be interesting.
Ooh, that actually is a thing.
It totally is. It totally is.
Christmas Carol isn't public domain, is it?
I'm pretty sure it is, but I would have to double check.
I think it is. Okay, I have one little flash fiction.
Oh, okay. Let's hear it.
Okay, it's called Emily. Okay. Little Emily vanished last year. Now they're pouring new sidewalks in my neighborhood, and I found her name in the wet cement written in remembrance. But it was written in reverse, and from below.
Oh no!
Wow.
I enjoyed that.
It's like a spooky, scary, share in the dark kind of story.
Reminds me of the world's shortest ghost story, which is just the last man on Earth is sitting in his study when there's a knock on the door.
Good times.
Good times. I think they did the Doctor Who based around that.
Yep.
All right. Well, if nobody else has anything to say, I think that Rick can declare this meeting of the Midnight Society closed.
Yes, it is closed.
All right.
Pleasant dreams, everyone.
Happy Halloween, folks.
See
Good
ya.
night.
Good night.
Things shall leave forever now. I do the next time we